Chapter 2040. What a coincidence. Chapter 2040. What a coincidence. In the Western Celestial Realm, the Universal Peace Heaven was ranked above average in terms of overall strength. There were a considerable number of Celestial King tier-level forces here, but the very most famous was naturally 100 Dragon City. This was an important branch of the ancient Alchemy Tower. Every time the Alchemy tournament took place, it would be hosted here, and the city bore an extremely important responsibility. The ground-piercing shuttle tunneled out of the ground several dozen miles outside 100 Dragon City. They couldn't advance any further, or they would be treated like invaders and be directly eliminated by the defensive formations of 100 Dragon City. Fuyu stowed the ground-piercing shuttle away, while Ling Han released everyone from the Black Tower. The party then journeyed towards 100 Dragon City. It was only several dozen miles away, just the matter of a few steps for them. To enter the city, one had to pay a fee first. Since 100 Dragon City was a great city of cultivators, as well as a great city of alchemists, not only were there very many cultivators who came and went, there were also a great many merchants here. In the entire Western Celestial Realm, this could be considered one of the more bustling large cities. Thus, the entrance fee into the city was very high, extremely high. One person would have to pay 100 star stones, and their spatial god tools would also be searched. If it was discovered that there was anyone smuggling in, they would be executed. It was very strict, but they did indeed have the confidence for it. There were at least 10 5-star alchemists in the ancient Alchemy Tower, and their influence was incredibly wide-ranging. Since these were rules that they had set in place, who would dare to disobey? Ling Han and his group honestly paid up on the city entrance fees and finally entered into this ancient city. It was said that there were more than 100 immortal dragons buried here. Perhaps it was only a myth, but it was indeed true that there would occasionally be sightings of the images of great dragons soaring from the earth and surging towards the 9 heavens in the city. Perhaps it was also because there were such bizarre scenes that it led to the legend of 100 dragons being buried here. Let's find an inn to settle first. Now that they were here, Fu Yu's name of young master was not very useful anymore. In United Link City, everyone would yield to him because he was the 3rd-generation heir of the Fu clan, but who would care about that here? For young masters like him, there were loads of them here. Brother Ling, don't meddle in the business of others here, Fu Yu reminded Ling Han. This guy was fond of meddling, but meddling would also have to depend on one's own strength. There were a great many matters here that they really could not afford to meddle in. Pa! The back of Fu Yu's head sustained another smack, and it was naturally Hu Nyo's work. Why are you being so fierce to Nyo's Ling Han? Ling Han, meanwhile, laughed loudly. It was really hard to say if he would meddle or not. Sometimes, if he cited it, he would move on a whim of his. There was no way he could hold back. I'll try, he said. Little Yu, you have to control yourself too. Don't let your temper of a spoilt young master rise up again. Tui, how could I possibly lose control? Fu Yu scoffed. They found an inn where they settled down. Because there was a glutton like Hu Nyo in their party, the second matter on their agenda was naturally to gorge themselves. This in itself held a restaurant, but it was all private rooms, making it seem very high-end. But because the 100 Dragons tournament battles and the Alchemy tournament were close at hand, it was also overcrowded with guests here, and they couldn't even get a private room. Guests, the private rooms are really all full. The waiter bowed repeatedly towards Ling Han and his group. Nonsense, isn't this one empty? Hu Nyo asked, pointing at a private room. Very coincidentally, the doors of that private room were open, and they could clearly see that there was not a single person inside. That room is already reserved, the waiter said hurriedly. Since they aren't here yet, let us use it first. Worst come to worst, we'll give it back to them when they're here, Fu Yu also said. By now, he was Hu Nyo's faithful lackey. The waiter paused, but after a while, he nodded and said, I won't hide the truth. This private room has been reserved permanently by young Master Du, but there are indeed not many times he has come. How about this? I will allow your party to use the private room, but if young Master Du comes, you must definitely let him have the private room. Please don't make things difficult for me. Fine. Hunyo nodded continuously. At present, the only thought on her mind was food. The group entered into the private room, and dishes and beverages were served very soon. Upon tasting, the taste was really not too bad. As expected of 100 Dragon City, there was a mortal beast flesh supplied here. As long as one could afford it, they even had a mortal palace tier beast meat. For cultivators, not only was the meat of a mortal palace tier beast delicious and nutritious, it could even allow them to increase their appreciation of regulations even after an immortal beast died. There would still be a sliver of power of regulation contained within its flesh, so there would still be some benefits to be had. Of course, when this immortal beast flesh was being cooked, an elite was definitely needed to dispel the murderous aura from it. Otherwise, if one with a lower cultivation level consumed it, their intestines and stomach would be destroyed instantly. Fuyu was very generous and ordered a serving of immortal beast meat, and it was at the immortal palace tier at that. This had required close to 1 million star stones from him, and when it was served, there were only a rare few pieces of meat on the plate. Is it delicious? Nyo wants a taste. Hunyo was the first to move her chopsticks. Let me have a taste too. Ling Han stretched out his chopsticks as well without reserve, serving both the Empress and the Heavenly Phoenix Divine Maiden a piece of meat first, and then he himself took a piece. Not bad, let me have another piece. Hunyo stretched out her chopsticks again. There was no one serving bewitching Maiden Ro, so she could only move herself and feed herself. Xiaogu copied his companions and also stretched out his chopsticks quickly. Shirley and his sister were not slow either. As long as one spent enough time around Hunyo, they would know that only if they moved fast enough would they get anything to eat. Food definitely had to be snatched, or they could only stay hungry. Chopsticks danced, and then Fuyu shockingly discovered that the plate was now empty. Fuck, that was it? He hadn't even eaten a bit. His 1 million star stones, even if he dumped it into the water, he could still hear a splash, and it could even cause a ripple. Guests, please quickly give way. Young Master Du is here. Right at this moment, that waiter suddenly ran over, his face filled with anxiety. Since they had already had a previous agreement, Ling Han and his group could not say anything either. They all rose up, and as for the remaining food, there was no need to worry. There was a glutton here that would have it wrapped for takeaway, and there was absolutely not going to be the slightest bit of wastage. They exited the private room, and had not taken a few steps they saw 7 people approach them. They were all extremely young, and were all men. Huh. One of them spotted Ling Han and his group, and his expression immediately changed. Even his body was beginning to shudder. Little Ruan, what's wrong with you? Have you been playing so hard yesterday that your knees are weak now? Someone beside him asked with a laugh. Haha, you really have made no mistake with your surname. You really have soft knees. Ling Han looked over, and suddenly felt like this was really a small world. That person was Ruan Dongxiang. You. Ruan Dongxiang raised his finger shakily, appearing to be incredibly furious, but at the same time inconceivably terrified. This was natural. He had been killed once by Fu Hui, so naturally it would leave a very strong phobia in his heart. Little Ruan, what is it? The person in the lead of the other party, a young man in green robes, asked in a deep voice. He was walking at the forefront, and the remaining 6 were following his lead. A few months ago, they killed my divided soul, Ruan Dongxiang said harshly. At the time, I was pursuing my fiancée and her adulterer, yet was stopped by these people, and this person is the murderer who has killed my divided soul. He pointed at Fuyu. Hearing him say these words, the green-robed young man and the others all erupted, and felt that Ling Han and his group were really too vicious, not only sheltering an adulterous couple, and even killed the divided soul of the victim. Haha, I never thought that there would be such people in this world. A young man dressed in purple robes walked out, sweeping an eye over Ling Han and his group before disdainfully saying, all of you kill your own divided soul, and then you may leave. However, he paused, pointing at Fuyu. He has to stay behind. Chapter 2041, Angered. Chapter 2041, angered, very arrogant. To demand that each of them destroy one of their own divided souls, and Fuyu was to stay behind too. Stay behind for what? Naturally to be killed. However, Ling Han and his party had seen this kind of situation quite frequently and could not even be bothered to feel anger. In any case, they could directly crush them if they were unhappy, so what was the point of getting angry? Fuyu, on the other hand, could not keep his cool. He was a standard young master. It would only be others that would be following his lead obediently in the past, and when had he ever been disobeyed? And now not only was there someone that dared disrespect him, they even wanted his life. How could this not make him angry? What arrogant words! Are you all even qualified? Fuyu scoffed. The young man in purple robes showed a prideful expression. I, Long Butian, have never failed to honor the words that I have said. Oh, then you're going to make an exception today. Fuyu met him measure for measure. What are you people just standing around for? Quickly destroy your own divided soul, otherwise, your only fate is death. The young man in purple, Long Butian, turned to look at Ling Han and the others, his eyes menacing, and the word king actually appeared on his forehead. Hunyo immediately felt very intrigued and stared at that king on his forehead. Meanwhile, Ling Han smilingly asked, "You all should not just listen to this person's side of the story, right?" It was not that he feared these young men, but he had no wish to fight any meaningless battle, so he was willing to keep the peace. He related the story of Guoming and his wife, adding no extra details, nor did he exclude anything. When he was done, he smilingly said to these young men, "Everyone, do you still intend to stand up and appeal for justice for this trash?" Long Butian showed a hesitant expression. He was indeed a profligate young master and had always been a tyrant himself. However, he was a man with limits, and the actions of Ruan Dongxiang made him feel disgraced. "You're pregnant. Your whole family's pregnant." Right at this moment, Xiaogu suddenly blurted out. Instantly, Long Butian and the others all looked furious. This was an extremely serious provocation, having insulted even their entire families. Ling Han couldn't help but turn to look at Fuyu. These words from Xiaogu were clearly copied from this guy. Meanwhile, Fuyu looked embarrassed. Previously, he had advised Ling Han to keep a low profile and stay away from trouble, but in the end, it was he that had become the trouble magnet. First, he had been targeted by Ruan Dongxiang, and now, because the words that he had once said were copied by Xiaogu, it had led to another turn of events. "You're a pervert. Your whole family are perverts." Xiaogu continued to copy. This naturally had become fuel added to the fire, causing the rage of Long Butian and his group to burn in flame to the extreme. Ling Han sighed. This Xiaogu could have learnt to speak at any other time, yet he coincidentally had to choose this moment. "In short, you are all trash," Xiaogu concluded finally, and even pointed at Long Butian and his party, his voice and expression on point. "Ha ha ha ha." Hunyo burst out into uproarious laughter. "You're courting death." Long Butian was the first to move and grabbed out at Xiaogu. Xiaogu's expression was completely puzzled, having absolutely no idea why the other would suddenly make a move on him. What did he do? And in the eyes of Long Butian and his party, this expression on Xiaogu's face was just asking to be beaten. You had clearly said such offending words, and you actually still had an expression as if you were wronged? Just how detestable would that have to be? Long Butian humphed harshly, his fingers slightly stretched out, and the might increased further. Ling Han moved, and this strike from Long Butian was sent back. Yeah? Seeing this scene, the other 5 young men all looked astonished. Though Long Butian was a spoiled young master, he was an incredibly strong young master, with Earth Soul level cultivation, and was an Emperor tier as well. In theory, he should be invincible even in Heaven Soul, but Ling Han actually managed to withstand a blow from him. This was extremely shocking. "So you do have some strength?" Long Butian humphed lightly, the fighting spirit in his eyes blazing. Ling Han had stepped out on Xiaogu's behalf because he feared that Xiaogu didn't know his own strength, and would accidentally kill the other. Though they were now on opposing sides, Ling Han did not think that there was any irresolvable hatred between them, and they had to battle each other to death. "Monarch Tier," the young man in green robes said solemnly, his eyes bright. His name was Du Xiaojun. He was the leader of their group, and his natural talent in cultivation was also the highest. Not only had his cultivation level reached Earth Soul, he himself was also a monarch tier. Otherwise, he couldn't possibly have been looked up to as leader by Emperor Tiers. Top-grade monarch tier, he added further. Ordinary monarch tiers would only be able to maintain invincibility with a gap of 2 levels, and with Ling Han's cultivation level at Yang Soul, he could only be invincible even against Earth Soul. Yet Long Butian was an Earth Soul level Emperor tier, which was enough to overcome any Heaven Soul. Hence, as Ling Han was able to match Long Butian, he definitely had to be a top-grade monarch tier. Ling Han fanned his hand. The exchange of blows with Long Butian caused his hand to feel slightly sore. It could not be helped. He was quite behind in terms of cultivation level. However, he had cultivated the indestructible Heaven Scroll, and this kind of impact was no big deal for him. He smiled and said, "This friend of mine is a little blank. Don't take his words to heart." They could see that. Du Xiaojun, Long Butian, and the rest were not idiots. Instead, they were all prodigies, though they were just a little arrogant and overbearing. There was something clearly off with Xiaogu, looking rather like a fool. There was indeed no need to descend to his level. "Young Master Du, don't be tricked by him. This person is most skilled at scheming," Ruan Dongxiang hurriedly called out. He was not one of Du Xiaojun's circle, and had only managed to mingle with them coincidentally, and just for a few days too. Thus, he was naturally worried that Du Xiaojun would be convinced by Ling Han and refuse to avenge him. Du Xiaojun cast a cold stare at Ruan Dongxiang. One could know a person for a long time without understanding his true nature. He had not thought that this person who looked like a man of fine talent would actually have such an unbearable inner character. He had no wish to have this kind of trash become his follower. However, he did not display this, and only said to Ling Han, "If you can take 100 moves from Butian, I will befriend you." Though Ling Han had just withstood a strike from Long Butian just now, Long Butian had not gone all out at the time, and there was still a gap of 2 minor levels between the two of them. Even a top-grade monarch tier would find it very difficult to make up for such a massive discrepancy in battle prowess. And to take on 100 moves? Difficult. Ling Han smiled slightly and replied, "All right." Du Xiaojun nodded and was slightly admiring of Ling Han's courage. Then, with a toss of his hand, a chessboard immediately appeared on the ground. "Enter into the board for a match then." Xiao, Long Butian was the first to leap in. Hi's figure rapidly shrank in size, turning into a tiny on the chessboard. This was a spatial god tool, just a slightly different kind. Ling Han also leaped in and stood opposite of Long Butian. "I will not pull my punches," Long Butian declared. "All right." Ling Han nodded, but he did not take it to heart. In the dividing soul tier, the person who could wound him severely should not have been born yet. Perhaps the only one was Ji Wuming, and he was a reincarnated 9th Heaven Celestial King, so could not be considered according to the normal logic. As for others, he could just ignore them. "Watch out." Long Butian stretched out a hand, his figure rising into the skies, with the word "King" glowing hotly on his forehead. He said that he would not be pulling any punches, but because this was a spar, his killing intent had already dispelled. However, the attack was still harsh. The word "King" on his forehead exuded a stunning brilliance, surging with endless power and frightening battle prowess. Ling Han released a battle cry, his hands balling into fists, and met the other in a head-on clash of force. Boom, 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 boom. Not only was Ling Han a top-grade monarch tier, he also possessed 4 source powers of heaven and earth. Thus, his battle prowess had actually exceeded the range of monarch tiers. Just see, what other monarch tier would possess 4 source powers? To say nothing of 4, there was none that even had 1. Chapter 2042. Opening up the source powers of heaven and earth for development. Chapter 2042. Opening up the source powers of heaven and earth for development. Hong, long, long. Inside Ling Han's body, the four source powers were all flickering, as if they were about to slice open the heavens and earth. What was a source power of heaven and earth? It was a part of the foundations of the world when the heaven and earth first split apart, and had a unique significance. For example, though the nine heavens flame and shining source water would disappear, the heaven and earth would eventually nurture them anew. Unless this heaven and earth also died, the source powers of heaven and earth would exist eternally. Ling Han had a feeling that he was far from having released the full might of the source powers of heaven and earth inside his body. Otherwise, his battle prowess would be able to improve further, and he would truly be able to match Ji Wuming, or even surpass him. He battled fiercely with Long Butian as he continued to ponder a way to make himself even stronger. Before this, he had already been considering this problem and already had some vague idea, but he had never put it into practice. It was very simple, and that was to inscribe formations inside his body. In the ancient realm, he had already tried this, and the effects were astonishingly good, but in the celestial realm, this was an impossible feat. Celestial-level formations were incredibly massive, such as a great mountain protection formation, or the formation inscribed on a battleship. To inscribe formations on the godly bones inside the body, this could not be said to be impossible, but at least for now, Ling Han was not able to do so yet. Then how was he supposed to inscribe formation patterns? Use the source powers of heaven and earth. The source powers of heaven and earth were at the celestial king tier. As long as he could guide a sliver of their might, supreme battle prowess would be able to burst out. And what Ling Han had to do was to release this might. How to release this might? Using the relationship of restraint and support among the five elements. Though there were only four source powers of heaven and earth at present, which could not form a perfect circle of the five elements, but there was only the shortage of one, so he should still be able to guide it, though the might would be considerably weaker. Let's test it out. Ling Han activated a source power of heaven and earth. Boom! It turned into an incredibly ancient seal that was inscribed onto one of his godly bones. Then, it began to slowly dissipate. The secrets of the heaven and earth could never have been inscribed. He activated a source power of heaven and earth again, and inscribed on the second godly bone, and then it was the third. However, he had not even activated the fourth source power of heaven and earth when the seal on the first godly bone had already completely dimmed. No, he was too slow. Ling Han thought, then let's try again. Boom! He was trying fiercely inside his body, and in the outside world, Long Butian was also intensely battling him. He had completely suppressed Ling Han. His hands formed claws, palm strikes, and punches that endlessly barraged Ling Han's body. However, though Ling Han was slightly distracted, his defense was not the slightest bit breached. No matter how Long Butian attacked him, he was still completely unhurt, causing Du Xiaojun and his group who were spectators to frown. How could there possibly be a freak with such frightening defense? Ling Han continued to study his new move inside his body. He had a feeling that he was close to succeeding. 91, 92, 93. On the outside world, everyone was counting, and the limit of 100 moves was already close at hand. Pong, pong, pong. The more Long Butian fought, the more intense his attacks became. Since young Master Du said he was to spar with Ling Han, that meant that there was no longer any animosity between both of them, but as an elite, he still wanted to win. Though Ling Han had been beaten submissively all this while, this was not the result that Long Butian wanted. Instead, he wanted a victory that could not be doubted and that he had obtained after battling to his heart's content. Hence, his battle prowess was on full throttle, pouring out a mad barrage of attacks on Ling Han. 99. Wang, right at this moment, a majestic light flashed within Ling Han's body. His aura suddenly strengthened by a good few times over, but it immediately dimmed back down. Pong! Ling Han took another blow, and his whole person was sent flying. Then, he landed back on the ground, sliding back at least a few hundred meters on the ground before he finally stopped. 100. Long Butian still wanted to continue the assault, but after some thought, he did not do so in the end. The battle had already ended. He was the first to step out of the chessboard, and then Ling Han slowly flew back out. He looked completely dazed, as if he was preoccupied. "I will befriend you," Du Xiaojun laughed, and took the initiative to stretch out a hand towards Ling Han. Ling Han still looked completely blank, and stretched out his hand dumbly, shaking Du Xiaojun's hand. "Since we're friends now, come, let's drink." Du Xiaojun pulled on Ling Han's wrist and invited him into the private room. Then, he said to the waiter, "Serve all the fine wines and dishes. Nyo wants to eat immortal beast meat, and it has to be at the immortal palace tier." Hunyo hurriedly called out. She had no idea of the concept of being reserved. A muscle involuntarily twitched in Du Xiaojun's cheek. Though his identity was illustrious, it had not reached the extent that he could dine on immortal palace tier beasts willfully yet, but he had already boasted just now, so he could not bring himself to step back now. He could only nod at the waiter, indicating that the latter could serve this dish. "Got it." That waiter hurriedly left with the order, his expression filled with happiness. If this kind of precious meat was sold, he as the promoter would also be rewarded. Though he had not promoted anything at all this time, the bonus would still be written onto his account. It was not too much, just 100 star stones, but for a minor character like him, 100 star stones was definitely considered an exorbitant sum. Ruan Dongxiang also wanted to follow them into the private room. However, with a glance from Du Xiaojun, a young man in yellow robes stretched out his arm with a chuckle, blocking Ruan Dongxiang from advancing any further. "Young Master Du," Ruan Dongxiang called out immediately. "Get lost." The expression of the young man in yellow robes turned cold. This kind of trash actually wanted to join their circle? Previously, they had been deceived by him, so how could that even be possible now? Ruan Dongxiang's face was as red as blood. To him, this could be considered an unbearable humiliation. His hands clenched tightly, forming fists. After a while, he finally turned around and left furiously. He would remember the humiliation today, and would definitely get his revenge in future. Seeing him leave, the young man in yellow robes said, "Young Master Du, this person is clearly the type to hold grudges. Should we?" He made a motion that mimicked slitting the throat. Yet Du Xiaojun only smiled faintly and said, "So what if this kind of minor character holds a grudge? If he really dares to stretch out his hand, I will take his wretched life." The others all nodded. Du Xiaojun was definitely qualified to say these words. They then returned their attention to the banquet. Du Xiaojun was a monarch tier and had an elegant demeanor and grace. He could casually tell them of any interesting anecdotes, easily making them smile or roar with side-splitting laughter. He was completely dominating the atmosphere. Meanwhile, Ling Han was completely sleepwalking the entire while, as if he had lost his soul. Du Xiaojun and his party thought that he was feeling despondent because of having lost to Long Butian, and all tried to console him. After they were done with their meal, Du Xiaojun ardently invited Ling Han and his group to visit his manor, but the Empress declined him tactfully. She helped support Ling Han as they returned to their accommodations. Anyone who was not in the know would think that Ling Han had gotten drunk. However, the truth was that Ling Han was completely immersed in his own world. In the final clash with Long Butian, he had finally successfully grasped a sliver of opportunity and seen a way to boost the source powers of heaven and earth. However, this kind of inspiration had passed in a flash, and he had been earnestly trying to recall it all this while. Thus, it looked like he had been struck dumb, causing Du Xiaojun and his party to misunderstand that he was feeling unhappy due to having lost. After returning to the inn, he immediately entered into the Black Tower and went into comprehension underneath the reincarnation tree. In the outside world, 3 days' time passed in the blink of an eye. Inside the Black Tower, a change that turned everything completely upside down was taking place in Ling Han's body. On each of the 4 godly bones, there was an ancient seal flickering, but always when the last one lit up, the first one would dim, and they could not light up all at once. That's it. He suddenly snapped his eyes open. Wang, his eyes blazed, capable of piercing through the darkness. Wang, on the 4 godly bones, 4 seals lit up simultaneously. Chapter 2043, Astonishing Might. Chapter 2043, Astonishing Might. Success. Ling Han didn't even get the time to feel pleased when he saw the 4 seals on the 4 godly bones inside his body suddenly resonate with one another, and it was becoming increasingly intense. **T. Ling Han only managed to yell internally when he felt a frightening force surge over him. Pa, 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 pa. The godly bones in his body all shattered in an instant, and his mind was also destroyed at the first instant. Boom! Flames burned brightly, and Ling Han walked out from the fiery flames. Brat, you almost killed yourself. Small Tower appeared and gave him a harsh warning. If this had been 3 days ago, there would have been no way you could use Rising from the Ashes, and you would have died immediately. After Rising from the Ashes was used once, a very long amount of time was needed before it could be used a second time. Previously, Ling Han had already died once when he had collected the firm essence green gold, and that hadn't been too long ago, either. Ling Han also felt lingering fear, but how could he have foreseen that? When the 4 source powers of heaven and earth resonated and shook together, it could actually cause a burst of such frightening might, so powerful that even his physique could not even withstand it. Are you an idiot? Those are source powers of heaven and earth, and are of the same level as celestial kings. Their might is only limited because they are affected by your cultivation level. But if you are so determined to forcefully unlock this seal, what else could it be but a suicidal move? Small Tower continued to reprimand him harshly. Yet Ling Han shook his head and said, "It was my mistake this time, but even if I was given another chance, I will still choose to do so. Because, if I do not do so, there is absolutely no way I can be a match for Ji Wuming." And only now did Ling Han see a real hope of defeating Ji Wuming. At least, there was absolutely no possibility that Ji Wuming would be able to shatter Ling Han's body in a single move, but Ling Han could accomplish that. Thus, if he unleashed this blow, Ji Wuming definitely could not stand against it. I really have to study it carefully. This is used to damage my enemy, not to kill myself, he mumbled to himself, and began to study it again. You're nuts. You've gone mad. Small Tower murmured. It could not understand why Ling Han had to do this, risking his life in an action that seemed so unwise to it. Yet Ling Han enjoyed it and never tired. He walked on the edge of danger, yet was so excited that every single pore on his body relaxed and expanded. He guided the 4 source powers of heaven and earth again, but this time, before they completely exploded, he completely poured this power outside. Boom! A crimson land that was 1,000 miles in diameter immediately appeared ahead of him. So strong. Ling Han was slightly dumbfounded. The destructive power of this is stronger than that of any celestial technique that I have grasped, but the disadvantage is that it cannot be changed. It is merely an attack blasted out. If the opponent's speed is fast enough, he is completely capable of dodging. In that case, I will have to think of a way for this attack to explode even faster, and for the range of blast to become wider so that there would be no way of dodging. Additionally, I feel this attack could explode just the slightest bit later so the 4 source powers of heaven and earth could resonate for a little bit longer. No, no, no. This cannot be considered resonance, but rather making use of the independent nature of the source powers of heaven and earth, causing them to collide with each other, which leads to the seals on them unraveling just the slightest bit, bursting out with destructive power that has surpassed my cultivation level. The longer the time of collision is, the more the seal would be unlocked, and the more terrifying the destructive power naturally would be. I just have to control this extent. Ling Han tried again. This time, he allowed the 4 source powers of heaven and earth to collide longer. Boom! The frightening attack was launched, and everything within 10,000 miles of him turned into nothing. Wah! Opening his mouth, he spat out a mouthful of blood. It was golden, looking like liquid gold. I almost died. He wiped off the cold sweat. This was really wandering on the boundary of life and death. Just now, he had allowed the four source powers of heaven and earth to clash just a little longer, and the burst of might soared in power, but at the same time had caused severe injury on him, and all his godly bones had shattered completely. If it had been that slight bit longer, he would definitely have died. This is really exciting. He laughed at himself. As he channeled a drop of indestructible true fluid, his injuries immediately healed. These injuries were caused by himself, so the martial intent that was left inside his body naturally could not cause a conflict inside his body. Thus, the moment the indestructible true fluid was channeled, his godly bones recovered instantly. Small Tower was already so furious that it was giving him the cold shoulder and did not say a single word. Ling Han studied his project continuously. He wanted to find a point of balance between power and safety. Another 3 days passed in the outside world, and Ling Han finally stopped. Success. He broke into a grin. However, using the collision of the four source powers of heaven and earth to explode with an attack that can destroy the heaven and earth, can this be considered my own strength? Strictly speaking, this is also depending on external power, but I have just stowed this external power in my own body. My present cultivation level is too low, so I just have to borrow the force of an external power. When I reach the pinnacle, I myself will be the strongest. Ling Han exited the Black Tower and asked the women if anything had happened in the last few days. Yes, countless prodigies have gathered, waiting for the 100 Dragons tournament battles to start, Hunyo said. Ling Han couldn't help but smile. That's right. When is this 100 Dragons tournament battles going to begin? One could really be quite speechless with him. He had come here to participate, yet didn't even know what time the tournament would be held. Looks like it will still take over a dozen days, the Empress said. Is it going to be tournament stage battles? Ling Han asked. No. The Empress shook her head. It is said that everyone will be entering into a natural mystery realm and participate in some kind of contest there. The first one to walk out of it, or ascend to the pinnacle and reach some kind of throne, or obtain some kind of treasure would be first place. They would be instilled with power from the 100 dragons of the mystery realm and have endless benefits. Hearing her say such, Ling Han knew that the Empress wasn't very familiar with the 100 Dragons tournament battles either. He wanted to seek out Fuyu and get some detailed information. In the 100 Dragons mystery realm, there are a total of 3,000 great paths. A great path is referring to multiple pathways, and not the Tao of heaven and earth, Fuyu explained. Ling Han couldn't help but grit his teeth and retorted, I understand this part. There is no need for you to take me for an idiot and deliberately explain this. Hee, I was just afraid that you would misunderstand, Fuyu said very shamelessly with a smile. All right, continue. After we enter into the 100 Dragons mystery realm, we have to walk these 3,000 great paths. Only once we will have walked these 3,000 great paths will the real contest truly begin, but I am not too sure of the exact details either, Fuyu said. Interesting. Will the Alchemy gathering be held after the 100 Dragons tournament battles then? Ling Han asked. Fuyu nodded. It's like that every time. No matter how long the 100 Dragons tournament battles would continue for, ultimately, the Alchemy tournament would be after it, so there is no need for you to worry. The entry requirement for the 100 Dragons mystery realm was being less than 10 million years old, and it would open once every 100 million years, which meant that no one could enter twice. Thus, all information about what was contained within had only been passed on through word of mouth by others. Then, we'll just wait for the 100 Dragons mystery realm to open. In the next few days, Ling Han was still focused on studying the four source powers of heaven and earth. He called this a clash of source powers. At present, it was 4 source powers, but in the future, it could possibly be 5, 7, 9. Meanwhile, Fuyu hung out with Du Xiaojun and his group as if they were joined at the hip. They were all spoiled young masters and had similar tempers, so they naturally hit it off. Very quickly, 13 days passed. Boom! A massive bang echoed throughout the entire city. Whichever corner one was in, they could hear it clearly, and when they all walked out, They only needed to raise their heads, and they would be able to see the images of 100 dragons entwined together in the skies above them. Finally, these dragon images grouped together to form a doorway. The 100 Dragons Mystery Realm was open. Chapter 2044, Four Great Monarch Tears. Chapter 2044, Four Great Monarch Tears. Let's go. Multiple figures flew towards that doorway in the skies. Shio, shio, shio. When the figures passed through that doorway, they immediately disappeared from sight. That was a mystery realm. Ling Han, the Empress, and the others also flew, pouncing towards that doorway. Wong, 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 wong. One after another, it was as if the figures were passing through mud. Their movements slowed. However, when they passed through these doors, they suddenly felt a feeling of ease fill their whole bodies. Ling Han discovered that he was presently standing on a cliff, and multiple bridges were connected to this cliff. Upon counting, there was no less and no more, but 3,000 exactly. So these were the so-called 3,000 Great Paths. Great Tao naturally numbered more than 3,000, but has always been represented by 3,000 Great Paths. Ling Han uncovered that 2,990 of the Great Paths were extremely ordinary and were not much different from ordinary covered bridges, while the remaining 10 were more unusual. 9 were golden, and 1 was black. After so many countless years, there has only been a mere 321 people that could step on those 9 golden paths. On average, there is even less than 1 person every time, Fuyu said. Brother Ling, do you know how many years this is? At least an epoch. However, every person that could step on the golden paths had become a 5th heaven celestial king at least. Over an epoch, there were actually only a mere 321 people that had managed to step on those 9 golden paths, which showed just how high the difficulty level was. You cannot simply step on these great paths just because you want to. You must be guided by your heart. Whichever great path is closest to the Tao that you cultivate, that great path would then light up. Otherwise, if you stepped on another path, you would immediately lose your footing and fall down. In this place, don't even think of flying. As for those that have fallen off this cliff, I have never heard of anyone managing to survive. Hunyo was curious, and pointing at that black path, she asked, "What about this one?" This black-colored bridge is also called the Most Venerable Divine Path, and so far, there has not been one that has managed to step on it, Fuyu said. Most Venerable Divine Path. Ling Han looked closely. Actually, every bridge was formed by a dragon, and the end connecting their side was the dragon's tail, while the body of the bridge itself was the dragon's torso, and it extended across countless miles. He was sure that the other end would be the dragon's head. The golden paths were different. Every bridge was formed by 9 dragons interwoven together. Their dragon claws protruded, showing endless, overbearing might. The most unique one was naturally that black-colored path, which was formed by a total of 99 dragons. It was like the Emperor of Dragons, exceptional and domineering. While they were conversing, people were already stepping forwards to stimulate the dragon bridges. There were very many people. Thus, the dragon bridges would endlessly flicker with light, as if they were the keys of a piano being played, which looked incredibly lively. But it was indeed just as Fuyu had said. Not one person managed to stimulate the golden bridges. Through an epoch, only a mere several hundred people had managed to step on them. All of them had been king among kings, overlord of overlords. Of course, also because of the fact that this would only once open every 100 million years, and the restriction that those exceeding 10 million years in age could not enter, about 90% of all top-grade prodigies would not be able to come here. Otherwise, theoretically, the number of successful people would still be able to multiply tenfold. Wang, an extremely imposing and domineering aura surged past, and a person appeared in the skies. This was a man of lanky build, dressed in green robes and extremely dashing in appearance. Tian Qingyue. It is actually Tian Qingyue. I did not expect that he would actually come here. Gods, this is one of the top 3 monarch tiers of the universal peace heaven. So what if it is the top 3? If he could obtain the benefits of the 100 Dragons Mystery Realm, Then he would no longer have to share the position with Xia Hodong, Yu Huaqing, and Zhu Huiyun, but would instead become the one and only monarch. Isn't he in the top 3? Why would there be 3 other people that share the position with him? That is because Yu Huaqing had not participated in the monarch tier ranking battles that year, but his strength is publicly acknowledged as being ranked in the top 3. Thus, these 4 people have always been talked about together. The strength of these 4 people is close, and they have never managed to decide which one of them is the one and only monarch. However, I am sure that after this contest, the result will be clear to see. Now that this kind of super character had appeared, it was naturally inevitable that he would be discussed by others. As Ling Han listened, he couldn't help but take a second look at Tian Qingyue. This person was unfathomable. Do you know of this person? Ling Han asked Fu Yu. Though the two of them did not belong to the same heavenly realm, Tian Qingyue seemed to be extraordinarily famous. Perhaps Fu Yu might know something about him. However, Fu Yu shook his head. Even celestial kings had not been to many heavenly realms. What more a minor character like himself? Tian Qingyue, cultivation level of the peak stage of the Heaven Soul. After the 100 Dragons Mystery Realm this time, he would probably be establishing his immortal palace. A voice suddenly rang out from behind Ling Han. Ling Han turned his head to look. It was Du Xiaojun. The latter was a citizen of the Universal Peace Heaven, and was monarch tier at that, so he naturally would not be unfamiliar with Tian Qingyue. Peak stage Heaven Soul? Ling Han murmured. He had confidence in himself, but was definitely not blind. At present, his battle prowess was indeed very high, especially after he had grasped the method of Great Clash of Source Powers. At that instant, the battle prowess that he could burst out with was incredibly terrifying. However, if he wanted to defeat a peak stage Heaven Soul Monarch tier, that was still filled with unknown variables. I really want to spar with him. Wong. The light doors in the skies suddenly flashed, and another person had entered into the mystery realm. He, too, caused a commotion. Xia Hodong. This was another supreme monarch tier of the Universal Peace Heaven, ranked equal with Tian Qingyue. Xiao Hodong. Tian Qingyue. The two super monarch tiers stared at one another. The intense fighting spirit in their eyes could be seen, as if a great battle could explode at any moment. Haha, I haven't missed anything, right? With a laugh, another young man entered into the mystery realm. Yu Huaqing. The people below all exclaimed in shock. This was really coincidental. The 3 supreme monarch tiers would actually show themselves at about the same time. Without waiting for the masses to catch their breath, another monarch tier had arrived. This time, it was a woman. She was exquisitely beautiful and dressed plainly, but it could not conceal her supreme grace, causing hearts to beat wildly. Zhu Huiyun. The 4 great monarch tiers had all gathered together, representing the strongest in the dividing soul tier of the Universal Peace Heaven. Though Universal Peace Heaven still had other monarch tiers, they were on completely different levels when compared to these 4 people. The stupid bird would fly first, Du Xiaojun said. Brother Ling, we can't compare to those 4 freaks, but it is never the strongest person who ends up laughing last in the 100 Dragons tournament battles. Another factor would be luck. Leaving first would mean an additional sliver of opportunity. He strode out and went to stimulate the 3,000 dragon bridges. After a while, 8 dragon bridges lit up at the same time. This meant that Du Xiaojun had as many as 8 choices. He could walk on any one of these dragon bridges. He hesitated slightly, and then chose the dragon bridge on the extreme left. These 8 dragon bridges were all related to water element Tao, which was also the great Tao that he cultivated. Because they were similar in nature, they had thus lit up at the same time, offering him an invitation. As expected of Du Xiaojun, to be actually capable of stimulating 8 dragon bridges. Too bad. As long as he could stimulate another bridge, it would form a qualitative change and gain him the approval of the golden dragon bridges. This is the difference between a monarch tier and a top-grade monarch tier. Perhaps it is only a sliver of difference, but this sliver has formed a world of difference. Du Xiaojun strode out and gradually walked further and further away. Soon, His figure could no longer be seen. I'm going. Fu Yu leaped out. Chapter 2045, Stimulating the Dragon Bridges. Chapter 2045, Stimulating the Dragon Bridges. Fu Yu also went to stimulate the dragon bridges. After a while, 5 dragon bridges lit up at the same time. Ling Han had already witnessed it many times over. Ordinary cultivators could only stimulate a single dragon bridge, while king tiers could stimulate at least 2, but it would only be 3 at most. As for emperor tiers, the number of dragon bridges they could stimulate at the same time would be between 4 to 6. Meanwhile, monarch tiers would be able to stimulate between 7 to 9, and when the number reached 9, it would lead to a qualitative change, gaining the approval of a golden dragon bridge. Fu Yu could stimulate 5 dragon bridges at the same time. This kind of natural talent would rank him above average among emperor tiers, which was considerably good. Fu Yu turned around and said to Ling Han, "Brother Ling, I'm leaving first." Then, stepping on a dragon bridge, he strode off. On the other side, the 4 great monarch tiers stared at each other for a while, and then began to stimulate their own dragon bridges respectively. Since I was the first to arrive, I will be the one to get the ball rolling. Tian Qingyue walked out. He began to stimulate the dragon bridges. This attracted the attention of the others, and they all looked over. Tian Qingyue, can he stimulate the golden dragon bridge? He probably can. If even the super monarch tiers ranked in the top 3 couldn't do so, that would be much too inexcusable. That is not definite. The 100 Dragons Mystery Realm would open every 100 million years, but is it definite that there would be someone that could stimulate the golden dragon bridges? On the contrary, it is instead more frequent that no one is capable of stimulating the golden dragon bridges. But Tian Qingyue is different. He will definitely be able to. That's right. He will definitely be able to. The majority were filled with confidence in Tian Qingyue and thought that he would definitely be capable of stimulating the golden dragon bridges. Wang, an ordinary dragon bridge lit up, and then it was followed by another, and then came the third and the fourth. This naturally was within everyone's expectations. Monarch tiers would be able to stimulate 7 dragon bridges at least, and with Tian Qingyue's strength as a supreme monarch tier, it was completely no problem for him to be capable of stimulating 8 dragon bridges. The key was whether he could stimulate the 9th and cause a qualitative change. When the 8th also lit up, everyone's eyes widened as they involuntarily became anxious. Would he really be able to do it? After only a while, the 9th ordinary dragon bridge lit up, and then all 9 dragon bridges dimmed at the same time. At the same time, a golden dragon bridge shone with majestic brilliance, the 9 dragons entwined on it seeming to come alive while exuding a terrifying aura. This was the intimidating pressure of the Celestial King tier, and even top-grade monarch tiers could not bear it, their faces paling. However, Tian Qingyue was completely unaffected. It was as if he could be spared from this kind of pressure now that he had gained the approval of the dragon bridge. As expected of Tian Qingyue, heavens, the golden dragon bridge approved of him. This has to be dated back to the last time the golden dragon bridge was opened, or how many years ago has the last time been? It has to be at least 100 million years ago. Everyone was looking at Tian Qingyue with admiring gazes. This man had created a miracle. Everyone, I will take my leave first. Tian Qingyue laughed loudly. He was also relieved. Though he had powerful self-confidence, the golden dragon bridges were really too hard to stimulate. Now that one had finally approved of him, he finally released the breath he had been holding, and his confidence also multiplied by 100-fold. Only a mere 300-odd people had managed to stimulate a golden dragon bridge in a whole epoch, and among these 300-plus people, even those with the lowest accomplishments had still reached the 5th heaven celestial king tier. And he was also going to become one of these 300-plus people. He would be able to become a 5th heaven celestial king at the very least. No, the 5th heaven celestial king tier was definitely not his finishing line. His target was the 9th heaven celestial king tier. Xia Hodong also stood up quickly. Moving the regulations inside his body instantly caused ordinary dragon bridges to light up one after another. When he reached the 8th, it seemed to lag, and the 9th seemed like it would not light up no matter what. Is Xia Hodong unable to stimulate the 9th dragon bridge? If he cannot do so, he will be left behind by Tian Qingyue in future. It cannot be helped. The 9th bridge is too hard to stimulate. This is a deciding barrier, and it is extremely difficult for even top-grade monarch tiers to breach this. Sigh. And just when everyone was lamenting, they saw that the 9th dragon bridge had suddenly lit up. Then, the light of the 9 dragon bridges was extinguished, leaving behind only a single golden dragon bridge that was flickering with light. Heavens, Xia Hodong has also stimulated a golden dragon bridge. 2 ultimate prodigies. Indeed, it is the legend that top-grade prodigies would normally not appear, but if they did, they would come in pairs, or even 3s and 4s. It is absolutely true. However, ultimately, only a single monarch tier would be able to attain the pinnacle, while the others would only become stepping stones. The more top-grade prodigies that appear at the same time, the more astonishing the height the monarch tier that manages to attain the pinnacle can reach. The great Eastern Celestial King of our universal peace heaven finally became an 8th heaven Celestial King because there had been 3 competitors that were evenly matched with him. If Yu Huaqing and Zhu Huiyun can both stimulate golden dragon bridges, then it will be 4 monarch tiers contesting for the best. In the future, it is highly possible that another 8th heaven Celestial King will appear. Everyone discussed spiritedly, and then turned their expectant gazes on Yu Huaqing and Zhu Huiyun. Now, the pressure was on the 2 of them. The 2 great monarch tiers walked out at the same time and began stimulating the dragon bridges. They had not disappointed the expectations of the masses, and 2 golden dragon bridges lit up at the same time. This time, everyone erupted into uproar. After a few 100 billion years, the miracle of 4 golden dragon bridges appearing at the same time had finally reappeared. This meant that another 8th heaven Celestial King would appear in the universal peace heaven. The 2 great monarch tiers released a battle cry at the same time and walked along their respective bridges. Though it was destined that one of the 4 of them would attain the pinnacle, exactly who it would be was only a show in the eyes of others, but for them, it was incredibly important. None of them wanted to go no farther than the 5th heaven Celestial King tier. Now that the 4 great monarch tiers had left, everyone's interest dropped. They were no longer interested in just watching, and approached respectively, stimulating their own dragon bridges. Niu is going too. Niu jumped out, going to stimulate the dragon bridges. At first, Ling Han had planned to have everyone drawn into the Black Tower so that they could all move together. However, upon further thought, he felt that every person would have their own individual fortune. If he safeguarded everyone by his side, they would be indeed safe. Yet it would also cause them to lose the fortune that they should have had. With this thought, he no longer advised them against moving alone. 1, 2, 3. The dragon bridges lit up one after another, and very soon, the number reached as many as 8. In Ling Han's eyes, this could not be more ordinary, and this was definitely not Niu's finishing line. She was the sole direct heiress of the Rock Palace, and was one that had obtained the brand of martial intent from a 9th heaven Celestial King at that. So how could she be inferior to Tian Qingyue, Xia Hodong, and the rest of them? However, this caused huge waves of commotion among the masses. What? Someone actually stimulated 8 dragon bridges. Which monarch tier is this? Don't know. It's a young girl, and she is outrageously beautiful. Everyone was watching Niu, and they were all conquered by her pure exquisiteness. At the same time, they were also stunned by Niu's strength. She was able to stimulate 8 dragon bridges. This was something that only a monarch tier could do, and it had to be a super monarch tier at that. Wang, only after a slight pause, the 9th golden bridge lit up, and then all 9 bridges dimmed. In their place, a golden dragon bridge lit up. Heavens! Everyone was holding their heads in shock, their mouths wide open in shock, but they could not utter a single word. The 5th golden dragon bridge had lit up. This was a new record in history. Before this, only 4 super monarch tiers had appeared at most, unlocking 4 golden dragon bridges. A contest between 5 monarchs. In the end, would a ninth heaven celestial king emerge from them? Ling Han, Nyo's going first. Nyo turned around and waved back at Ling Han. Then, she took out a chicken drumstick, which she chewed on as she walked forwards. Compared to Tian Qingyue and the others previously, she looked so relaxed as if she was here on vacation. Ling Han nodded with a smile, and then he heard the Empress declare, "I'm going." Chapter 2046. The Golden Dragon Bridge lights up again. Chapter 2046. The Golden Dragon Bridge lights up again. The Empress stepped out. Her purple long skirt stuck close to her figure as it fluttered in the slight breeze, putting the perfect outline of her figure on full display. Involuntarily, this made a great many people feel carefree and relaxed, unable to remove their eyes from her. Wong, wong, wong. The dragon bridges lit up one after another, and in an instant, their number exceeded 5. This is at least an emperor tier. Hee hee, when I go to choose my dragon bridge later, if I can walk the same path as her, I will definitely court this exquisite beauty. You had best save the effort. You are not even a king tier, so what right do you have to court her? Is an emperor tier definitely strong? My cultivation level is peak stage heaven soul, and the majority of emperor tiers would not be my match. The Empress's exquisiteness had caused a massive commotion. Though Nyo's beauty was not inferior to hers, the Empress's grace and bearing were as unique as a rare gem. Wong, the 6th and the 7th dragon bridge lit up in quick succession. Now, the noise of chatter from the masses instantly silenced. 7 dragon bridges lighting up meant that this exquisite beauty was a monarch tier. Any place that could nurture a monarch tier had to be of the celestial king tier, and that had to be a high-level celestial king tier at that. How could the descendant that had walked out from this kind of force be slighted? In quick succession, the 8th dragon bridge lit up. The crowds exploded in uproar. 8 dragon bridges lighting up at the same time. What did that signify? She could possibly attempt 9 bridges, and then would be able to stimulate a golden dragon bridge. Heavens, could it be that a 6th supreme monarch tier was going to appear? For monarch tiers appearing at the same time meant that it was possible an 8th heaven celestial king would emerge. Then, if this was the situation, did it mean that a 9th heaven celestial king was going to appear now? 9th heaven celestial king, the strongest in the world. Everyone inhaled sharply at the same time, stunned to the point of speechlessness. The 100 Dragons tournament battles this time round would definitely be the start of a new era. Wong, true enough, the 9th dragon bridge lit up. Suddenly, the 9 dragon bridges all dimmed, and a golden dragon bridge lit up. Heavens, what have I seen? Another prodigy that can stimulate a golden dragon bridge. What kind of prosperous age of cultivation is going to begin here? No, no, no. We have never seen these 2 women before. They must not be from our universal peace heaven. If monarch tiers were gathered from all the heavenly realms, it would be very normal for 6 super monarch tiers to appear. But however you put it, for 6 monarch tiers to appear at the same time, it is possible that a 9th heaven celestial king will emerge from among them. 9th heaven celestial king. 9th heaven celestial king. 9th heaven celestial king. Finally, the only words that were left being murmured by the mouths of the masses were 9th heaven celestial king. In the eyes of ordinary celestials, 9th heaven celestial king was an existence that stood at the pinnacle of the celestial path, on the same level as the heavens, supreme and noble. And they had personally witnessed the rise of a future ruler. This naturally caused them to feel their heads numb and feel extremely excited. Who would it be? Tian Qingyue, Xia Hodong, Zhu Huiyun, that little girl munching on a chicken drumstick? When they thought of Nyo, the masses all shook their heads repeatedly. As they saw it, a 9th heaven celestial king had to be incredibly austere. What 9th heaven celestial king would be munching on a chicken drumstick and act so casual? The Empress smiled dazzlingly at Ling Han, and then stepped onto her bridge. She was never a delicate flower that needed to depend on the protection of another, but rather the all-powerful great Empress. Ling Han mused ruefully in his heart. If you loved someone, you should not protect her completely, but had to give her space and allow her to fly as she willed. Bewitching Maiden Ro also stepped out. With a sway of her slender waist, she arrived at the edge of the cliff. That alluring grace instantly caused a few people to feel like their eyes were going to pop out. How could there be such a devastatingly seductive woman? Bewitching Maiden Ro stretched out her slender hand. She was clearly channeling her cultivation technique, yet it seemed like she was dancing elegantly. Suddenly, one after another, dragon bridges lit up, responding to her power of regulation. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. A total of 6 bridges. This meant that not only was Bewitching Maiden Ro an Emperor tier, she could also be ranked in the upper echelons of Emperor tiers, and was just a hair's breadth away from advancing into the ranks of Monarch tier. Unfortunately, Monarch tiers had to be at the 5th severance, and this was something that she could never accomplish in this lifetime. Unless she severed her own cultivation level and started back from the very beginning again. But exactly how many people would possess such determination? Bewitching Maiden Ro also smiled beautifully and stepped onto the bridge. Let me. After Bewitching Maiden Ro, countless people shoved one another in their efforts to stimulate the dragon bridges. They all dreamed of being able to pick the same dragon bridge as Bewitching Maiden Ro. In that way, they might perhaps have a chance of getting close to her. Ling Han couldn't help but feel surprised. The commotion that Bewitching Maiden Ro had given rise to would actually be even larger than that made by the Empress and Hunyo. Upon further thought, this was also normal. Though the Empress and Hunyo were more beautiful, one was incredibly dignified, while the other was pure. If one were to talk about the matter of seducing men, it was definitely Bewitching Maiden Ro's allure that was superior. A bewitching maiden was a bewitching maiden after all. Ling Han naturally would not allow the heavenly Phoenix Divine Maiden to take risks. She had not even advanced into the severing mundane tier. If she was to meet with any villains on the Dragon Bridge, she really would not have the slightest bit of ability to save herself. It was naturally the same for Shirley and Shiryu. They were too weak, so they had best just obediently stay inside the Black Tower. Countless people were attempting to stimulate the Dragon Bridges. Actually, as long as they were cultivators and had reached the severing mundane tier and cultivation level, they would definitely be able to stimulate the Dragon Bridges. The only difference lay in the number. The majority could only stimulate a single one. After all, whether they were King tiers, Emperor tiers, or Monarch tiers, they belonged to the extremely limited category of people. Ling Han did not wait longer either. After bewitching Maiden Ro, he also began to stimulate the Dragon Bridges. However, what regulations should he use? Ling Han was slightly hesitant. Merely in terms of source powers of heaven and earth, he had 4 of them in his body, and added with the 3 types of power of regulation bestowed on him by the Black Tower, this number had reached as many as 7. Additionally, he himself also had a grasp of the regulation of slaughter, space, and time, and added together, this had broken the limit of 10. Even if it was in terms of his own grasp of the regulation of slaughter, space, and time, they were extremely powerful, though they could not be compared with the source powers of heaven and earth. Then, he would just try them one by one. The first one was fire. The first source power of heaven and earth that Ling Han had obtained was the 9 Heavens Flame, and thus he first stimulated the 9 Heavens Flame. The 9 Heavens Flame divided soul appeared. Boom! His whole body was burning fiercely, stimulating the Dragon Bridges. Wong, wong, wong. Suddenly, the Dragon Bridges lit up one after another. 5, 7, 8. This kind of great commotion was extremely astonishing, immediately drawing the eyes of a great many people. Then, they were all shocked silly. Another prodigy that could stimulate 8 bridges. Would he be able to stimulate another? It should not be possible. 6 Supreme Monarch tiers have already appeared just now, so it is impossible that another one would appear, right? The majority thought so. 7 Super Monarch tiers, just the thought of that made them numb. Wong. Right at this moment, the 9th Dragon Bridge lit up, and then just like previously, all the Dragon Bridges dimmed. Then, a golden Dragon Bridge exuded majestic light, as if a golden dragon was about to leap out of it. Heavens! The Golden Dragon Bridge has lit up again. It's the 7th one by now. This has broken all records in history, right? Everyone exclaimed in shock, and then they all became numb. Now, if there was an 8th person that could stimulate the Golden Dragon Bridge, they would already be capable of accepting it peacefully. Really, they could not be any more surprised than this. Their nerves were already tough enough. If they knew that Ling Han had stimulated the Golden Dragon Bridge with only a divided soul, they would definitely drop onto their knees in shock. However, Ling Han did not take a step. Chapter 2047, Most Venerable Divine Path. Chapter 2047, Most Venerable Divine Path. This was just a single source power of heaven and earth. Again, Ling Han activated the Shinin source water, and a supreme aura suddenly flowed out of his body, instantly causing 7 dragon bridges to light up at the same time and resonate. Fuck! You must be kidding me. This is absolutely not real. Previously, they had all thought that they would not drop their jaws again in shock. Heavens, what had they seen? This man had stimulated more than 9 dragon bridges. How was this possible? 9 was the ultimate figure of the heaven and earth, and throughout history, no matter how stunningly prodigious you were, the highest accomplishment that could ever be attained would only be stimulating 9 dragon bridges, which would ultimately turn into a single golden dragon bridge. And as for Ling Han's case, 16. Inconceivable, this was practically a freak. However, this was far from the end. Wong. Another 2 ordinary dragon bridges lit up, and the second golden dragon bridge was seen to light up. Heavens! Gods! A considerable number of people rubbed their eyes, but the scene in front of their eyes did not change in the slightest. It was still 2 golden dragon bridges that were flickering with light. Previously, a similar scene had also happened before, and that was when Yu Huaqing and Zhu Huiyun stimulated the dragon bridges at the same time, which led to 2 golden dragon bridges shining brilliantly at the same time. But that had only been accomplished by 2 super monarch tiers working together. And now, only one person had stimulated 2 golden dragon bridges, which had truly made history. Could it be that we are really going into a brilliantly prosperous age of cultivation? However, was this the end? No way. Ling Han then activated the fiery flame lightning strike wood, and dragon bridges were lighting up rapidly again. Everyone's mouth was wide open. This time, they could not make the slightest bit of sound anymore. Could it be that Ling Han still wanted to stimulate a 3rd golden dragon bridge? Wong. 7 ordinary dragon bridges lit up quickly, resonating with Ling Han. Then, the 8th one also lit up, and then it was the 9th one. The 3rd golden dragon bridge had lit up, as if it was welcoming Ling Han with opened arms. 3 bridges. There were gradually still people coming in, and they were immediately stunned into a daze the moment they entered. This had to be an illusion. It had to be. Ling Han smiled slightly and activated the firm essence green gold. Instantly, new ordinary dragon bridges lit up again, and then the 4th golden dragon bridge also lit up. Freak. I have seen a freak. I must still be dreaming. Because the 100 Dragons Mystery Realm is about to open, I became too excited and started dreaming. Who exactly is this freak? He stimulated 4 golden dragon bridges all by himself. That's right. Who is he? Very quickly, everyone came back to the same question. Who exactly was Ling Han? What kind of force managed to nurture this kind of freak that would practically make even supreme monarch tiers blush with shame? Ling Han was not in the mood to care about these people. His eyes were focused on that black dragon bridge. He was going to stimulate this dragon bridge. Since 9 ordinary dragon bridges could stimulate a golden dragon bridge, then would 9 golden dragon bridges be able to stimulate this black dragon bridge? Ling Han thought that this was feasible. 9 nines returned to 1, and that was the most venerable divine path. Thus, the present problem was whether he would be able to stimulate 9 golden dragon bridges. Again. He activated the power of the Black Tower. It was inside his body in the first place, so it could also be considered a part of his body. This naturally was a cheat, But what Ling Han was betting on was the high grade of the Black Tower. It was a heavenly venerable tier weapon, and in a certain aspect, it had even surpassed this heaven and earth. It should allow him to cheat. Wong, Wong, Wong. Multiple dragon bridges lit up. Ling Han was delighted. As expected. Thus, another 3 golden dragon bridges practically lit up at the exact same time. Everyone was speechless by now. They really did not know what words they could use to describe the feelings they were currently feeling. Previously, 6 great monarch tiers had only stimulated 6 golden dragon bridges, and this had already created history. But as for Ling Han, all by himself, he had stimulated 7 golden dragon bridges. Didn't that mean that he alone surpassed the 6 great monarch tiers? If there was ultimately one person from the 6 great monarch tiers that could become a 9th heaven celestial king, then what kind of celestial king would Ling Han become? 10th heaven? Sorry, there was no such thing as a 10th heaven celestial king in this world. Everyone was shocked to the point of speechlessness, but Ling Han was not the slightest bit conceited, because the Black Dragon Bridge had not lit up still. Again, he activated the 3 regulations of slaughter, space, and time, continuing to stimulate the dragon bridges. Wong, Wong, Wong. Indeed, there was no conflict with the Black Tower, and again dragon bridges lit up. The awesomeness of the Black Tower was evident from this. When it expressed its might, the 100 Dragons Mystery Realm saw it and Ling Han as one and the same. But when Ling Han similarly showed 3 types of power of regulation at the same time, the Black Tower could be clearly separated from Ling Han again. Otherwise, how could the power of regulation that Ling Han had grasped compare to the Black Tower? In comparison, it was natural that the stronger one would be taken, and Ling Han's own power of regulation was ignored. But now, the dragon bridges were still continuing to light up, and the number was endlessly increasing. 9. 15. This number had long since surpassed 9, but no new golden dragon bridge lit up. Ling Han understood. This was because he had used 3 types of regulations, and possibly was the equation of 5 plus 5 plus 5, gathering 9 which returned to 1. Thus, not one golden dragon bridge had lit up still. 16, 17, 18. When 18 ordinary dragon bridges lit up at the same time, all the dragon bridges shook, and then they all returned to dead silence. Not just the ordinary dragon bridges had dimmed, but even those 7 golden dragon bridges had lost their brilliance. What was going on? Everyone felt confused. What was the situation now? Ling Han was also slightly surprised. Could it be that his cheating had been discovered, so all his previous results were now confiscated? But right at this moment, 9 golden dragon bridges lit up at the same time. Heavens, 9 golden bridges lighting up at the same time. A magnificent feat that has no precedent. Inconceivable, unbelievable. This is going to be heaven-defying. Could it be? Quite a number of people was suddenly stunned as they turned to look towards that Black Dragon Bridge with wide eyes. The Most Venerable Divine Path, a dragon bridge that had never been stimulated before. Was it possible? Was it possible? The 9 golden dragon bridges flickered for a while, and then once again, they all dimmed. Hong, long, long. A large quake erupted in the entire mystery realm. Multiple images of immortal dragons appeared in the skies, chasing one another and entwining around each other. Auspicious red clouds filled the skies, as if some extraordinary existence was about to be birthed. Images of auspiciousness appears from nowhere. This means, the truly shocking scene is about to appear. Look! Boom! An indescribable aura surged out, causing everyone's eyes to darken. Pa! They all collapsed on the ground. At least 90% of them had passed out completely, and the remaining 10% found getting back to their feet extremely difficult, so they could only rest on their knees, feeling their legs tremble. They felt like they were facing the world's strongest dragon indeed, the Ancestor Dragon, also known as the Source Dragon, which was the ultimate, strongest existence from the first batch of living beings that had been born when the world had first come into existence. In front of this kind of being, they could only grovel. What right did they have to sit as an equal in its presence? In front of the stunned, excited, expectant eyes of these people, the black dragon bridge lit up slowly, as if an ancient dragon had suddenly come back to life. A boundless aura rippled out, shaking the 9 underworlds and enshrouding the 9 heavens. The Most Venerable Divine Path had been stimulated. Wang, an extremely imposing and overbearing aura surged over, and those that had previously fallen unconscious gradually regained consciousness. They would never forget this scene today. A young man in black robes walked elegantly forwards and stepped onto the black-colored dragon bridge, leaving behind the view of his back that they could only admire from afar. Chapter 2048, Ji Wuming arrives, the Most Venerable Divine Path reappears. Chapter 2048, Ji Wuming arrives, the Most Venerable Divine Path reappears. It was only when Ling Han's figure had disappeared from the Black Dragon Bridge for a very long time that everyone finally came back to their senses. Heavens, what had they just seen? Someone managed to stimulate the Black Dragon Bridge, the Black Dragon Bridge that represented the Most Venerable Divine Path. This time, exactly what kind of super elite would be born in the future? An overlord of 9th Heaven celestial kings, a supreme monarch? Who exactly is he? Definitely not someone from the universal peace heaven. Don't know. I have never seen him before. Everyone was exclaiming in shock as they held their head. Even if they did not get any rewards at all this time, merely the scene they had witnessed today was enough for them to boast about for a whole lifetime. To be able to personally witness the birth of a monarch among 9th Heaven celestial kings, that was an ultimate honor. And there were still a great many people that were still continuously entering. Brother Su, you were one step too late, and you will definitely regret it for your whole life. Lord Lu, you have finally arrived. I witnessed a scene just now that I will never forget for eternity. Ping Ping, I will take that person as my role model and become a great hero that the whole world will admire. Those that had newly entered naturally would not believe this, but they were no match for different people speaking about the same thing in unison. Though they were still skeptical about this, they no longer said that it was impossible with such certainty. 1 day, 2 days, 3 days, the time passed very quickly. A great many people had already set out on their own paths, and there were only a limited few chatterers that were still on the cliff. Whenever they saw someone new come in, they would boast of the glorious scene that they had witnessed, as if they themselves were Ling Han. Wang, a figure entered, looking very plain and ordinary, as if he was someone who could not be more average. This was a white-robed young man, holding a small bow in his hands as if it was a toy. If Ling Han had been here, his eyes would have definitely narrowed. This was no ordinary person. Ji Wuming. He had actually come to the Western Celestial Realm as well. Ji Wuming crossed his arms behind his back, a sliver of a smile wavering at his lips as he thought. During that battle, the dragon tribe was almost completely eliminated, with more than 100 divine dragons dying. To ensure that these divine dragons had not died for nothing, the ancestor dragon buried these dragon skeletons here so that they would resonate with the heaven and earth. The power boost of 100 dragons will have quite a good effect even on me, as it can temper and stabilize my physique. After all, I have swallowed too many different kinds of physiques, and over long periods of accumulation, it would definitely become a problem. The might of the dragon tribe is the most domineering, and using the power of 100 dragons to temper my body will be able to solve a problem for me. Additionally, the ancestor dragon's 4th son, Pu Lao, is also among those 100 dragons, and he has also reached 9th heaven. Though this little dragon is a little weak, he is still in 9th heaven existence, after all. The regulations of the 100 dragons interweaving together will lead to blooms of great Tao flourishing, which will also be quite beneficial for me. I will take them then. Ji Wuming stood unmoving as he stretched out his right hand, his fingers moving lightly. At the same time, Zhang Yun is here. He is a monarch tier from the firm city heaven, and it is said that he can be ranked in the top 5. However, the firm city heaven cannot compare with our universal peace heaven. Zhang Yun can be ranked in the top 5 in the firm city heaven, but he may not be able to squeeze his way into the top 20 here. No matter what, a monarch tier is still a monarch tier, After all, he cannot be insulted lightly or looked down on. Among the spirited discussions of the masses, Zhang Yuan stepped out and began to stimulate the dragon bridges. 1, 2, 3, and very quickly, 8 dragon bridges were lit. As expected, a prodigy that is ranked in the top 5 of the firm city heaven is still extremely strong. Being able to stimulate 8 dragon bridges, that is considerably amazing. He can be ranked in the upper ranks even among monarch tiers. It's unfortunate that he didn't manage to stimulate the 9th dragon bridge, or he would have been able to step onto a golden dragon bridge. Everyone was looking at Zhang Yuan enviously. Though this accomplishment would not be so astonishing if this had happened a few days ago, those that had previously witnessed a miracle happen had already stepped onto their own dragon bridges, so the people here were already stunned when they saw 8 dragon bridges shining simultaneously. Zhang Yuan was also pleased with himself. Though he had heard that a total of 6 people had stepped on golden dragon bridges when he came in, and 1 person had even stepped on the Most Venerable Divine Path, would he believe such nonsense? Looking at history, even in the most prosperous age of cultivation, only 4 people had simultaneously stepped on the golden dragon bridges, and now they were actually saying that there were 6? What was even more exaggerated was that someone actually stepped onto the Most Venerable Divine Path. Wasn't this completely lying through their teeth? Who would believe it? Just at this moment, Wong, several dozen dragon bridges lit up at the same time. It was too glorious. When anyone stimulated the dragon bridges, it would be them lighting up one by one. But now several dozen dragon bridges were lighting up at the same time, and the sight was enough to make their scalps go numb. This scene caused everyone to watch with wide eyes. A completely dead silence had fallen on the area, and you could hear a pin drop. 30, 40, 50, 60. Everyone there could only watch in utter shock, and even Zhang Yun's mouth was twitching as he turned to look at that white-robed young man next to him. 70, 80, 81. Boom. All the dragon bridges lost their brilliance, and at the same time 9 golden dragon bridges shone in quick succession. This time, everyone was naturally even more astonished. 9 golden dragon bridges had lit up at the same time, and this meant the Most Venerable Divine Path was going to unlock. Ji Wuming smiled faintly as his fingers flicked casually, appearing to be incredibly relaxed. If Ling Han had been here, he would have had to admit that he was impressed by Ji Wuming as well. He had borrowed the power of the Black Tower, using a cheating method to be able to stimulate the 9 golden dragon bridges, but Ji Wuming was depending completely on his own abilities. Of course, it could also be said that Ji Wuming was the greatest cheat. With the strength of a 9th heaven celestial king, he had cultivated the body of this lifetime again. So weren't various types of regulations reachable to him with just a casual move of his hand. Only a short while later, the 9 golden dragon bridges dimmed, and the black dragon bridge shone. A supreme aura surged out, capable of suppressing for all eternity. Everyone was sprawled out by the pressure of this aura, and even Zhang Yuan was no exception. So what if he was a monarch tier? In front of a celestial king tier-level aura, even he could only bow his head in submission. Yet Ji Wuming was still standing with his arms crossed behind him, not taking this aura to heart at all. In fact, there was even a slightly disdainful expression on his face. Though they were similarly 9th heaven celestial kings, just like there was a difference between king tiers and monarch tiers, Pu Lao might not have been able to withstand 100 moves from him years ago, and now he would not feel any reverence towards this kind of aura even after he had reincarnated and was cultivating from the start again. The Most Venerable Divine Path appeared. Zhang Yuan was green-eyed with envy. Though he was also a monarch tier, compared with Ji Wuming, who knew just how inferior he was in terms of aptitude. One could stimulate 9 golden dragon bridges, while the other could not even stimulate one. How were they supposed to compare? He glared at Ji Wuming, suddenly revealing an ominous glint in his eyes. This young man was merely at Yang Soul tier, while he was at Heaven Soul. There was a very, very wide gap between the two of them. Though he could not match the former in talent, they were both major tiers, and there was a gap of 3 minor levels between them. So how could it be that he could not match the former? He would kill him, eradicate this prodigy that he could only look up to. Pooh! He had not even finished the thought when he saw Ji Wuming had already shot out a punch, which forcefully crashed into his face. Why did the other dare to make a move on him? How was it that he managed to succeed? Why was it that he actually was completely incapable of reacting? Zhang Yun's body collapsed with a bang and brought endless questions with him to the end of his life. A grand monarch tier, and he had actually been insta-killed by someone who was inferior to him by 3 minor levels. This was practically inconceivable, and there was no way he could believe this. Yet Ji Wuming did not take it to heart at all. In the past, the number of 9th heaven celestial kings he had killed could not even be counted on 2 hands, in which one of them was not 100 times more stunningly and unprecedentedly talented than Zhang Yun. Was there any need for him to take it to heart? He strode forwards and stepped on the Black Dragon Bridge. Chapter 2049, Bloom of Tao. Chapter 2049, Bloom of Tao. Ling Han naturally knew nothing of what happened afterwards. He was walking on this Black Dragon Bridge. Previously, he had still been able to see the over 2,000 dragon bridges that were parallel to him, but as he continued walking, the other dragon bridges slowly disappeared, and in the end, only this Black Dragon Bridge that was left behind became wider and wider. Was this still a bridge? It was practically a plain. However, Ling Han had already walked for 3 days, and it was still completely deserted on the Dragon Bridge. There was only a black path, and no other color could be seen. This black path had been paved with dragon scales, so he felt an uneven texture when he stepped on it. It was useless even if he used regulations to protect himself. It was still very prickly to walk on because this was the power of regulation. Thankfully, it was only very prickly, but did not cause any wounds. Otherwise, it would really become a problem. Wang. An aura suddenly rose up from the bridge ahead of him, turning into a green-colored dragon. With a gust of wind, it fluttered as if it was going to be blown away by the wind at any moment. However, when Ling Han walked over, the green dragon manifested, and the dragon form turned into a human figure wearing green robes. That was an elegant youth. What was this? Ling Han had not even finished the thought when he saw this youth had aggressively launched an attack towards him. He shot out a punch, and Wang, seals glowed one after another. They formed on the surface of his fist as it crashed down on Ling Han. It was clearly just a very simple punch, but it had a supreme domineering air that seemed capable of piercing the heaven and earth. Ling Han humphed, and his right hand balled into a fist as well, greeting the blow coming from the green-robed youth. Pong! The 2 fists crashed into one another, and Ling Han was instantly sent flying back like an artillery shell. In terms of battle prowess, there was actually a wide gulf of many folds between him and this green-robed youth, so he could not even withstand a single punch from the latter. The green-robed did not quit while he had an advantage. With a step of his foot, he charged off in pursuit of Ling Han. Pong, pong, pong. He waved his fists repeatedly, raining down a mad barrage of attacks that poured on Ling Han. Ling Han had become a human punching bag, being attacked endlessly, and his body trembled wildly. However, while the green-robed youth's battle prowess was terrifying, it had not reached the extent that it could penetrate Ling Han's physique. No matter how hard he pummeled Ling Han's face had only paled slightly. "Have you had enough?" Ling Han roared. Though he was not wounded, he still could not accept being pummeled so submissively by someone. Boom! A terrifying light exploded from within his body, surging out in all directions. Great clash of source powers. Boom! The figure of the green-robed youth immediately twisted, and then was ripped apart, turning into pieces due to the impact of this light. Ling Han panted, not because he had used the great clash of source powers, but rather because the continuous barrage of attacks from the green-robed youth had caused his blood to flow faster, so he was slightly out of breath. If anyone found out about this, they would definitely go crazy. It should be known that this green-robed youth was an Earth Soul-level monarch tier, and his battle prowess had even surpassed ordinary heaven souls. But when the attacks landed on Ling Han, they were unable to cause even the slightest injury, and instead he had directly died with a counterblow from Ling Han. The great clash of source powers will be my strongest ultimate move in future. Ling Han broke into a smile. The explosive power of the divine fetus of fire was also very powerful, but it would extract all his power completely and was far from as useful as this move. Huh. An expression of shock appeared on his face. The green-robed youth was not a solid entity, but, as it turned out, it had been formed from a streak of dragon's breath. Now that he had shattered, he had turned back into dragon's breath, which was wafting around him. A sliver touched Ling Han's body and was absorbed by him, and he immediately felt like he had gotten a shot of adrenaline, his spirit re-energized. This was a very nutritious substance. Ling Han immediately became alert. He took the initiative to open up the pores on his body, and the dragon's breath immediately entered continuously into his body, nourishing and invigorating him greatly. The dragon was the leader of all immortal beasts of the world, and this dragon's breath was the solidification of its essence, so it was shockingly beneficial. This black dragon bridge had never been unlocked before, and after so many years, how amazing would the essence contained in the dragon's breath be? Ling Han laughed aloud and strode forwards. Not too long after, he saw another streak of dragon's breath rise up, turning into a crimson dragon. Then, it elegantly dispersed and turned into the form of a red-robed woman. With a dragon's roar, the red-robed woman charged over. She clearly looked so delicate, but her figure was incredibly agile. As her claws slashed out, even a great mountain could be easily reduced to dust. Ling Han did not immediately use the great clash of source powers, but rather used other celestial techniques to attack. However, he was really no match for her. After all, he was only at young soul. Even if he was an overlord among monarch tiers, he would still be limited by his cultivation level. At most, he could only battle ordinary heaven souls. But this red-robed woman was an earth soul monarch tier, someone capable of defeating all common heaven souls. Pong, pong, pong. Ling Han had become a punching bag again. No matter what kind of celestial technique he used, it would be easily dealt with by his opponent. If Ling Han really wanted to defeat this opponent, he actually had a considerable number of options. Firstly, the great clash of source powers. Second, the explosion of the divine fetus of fire. And third, the Black Tower exercising its might. As long as time was stopped, he would immediately be able to kill his opponent. However, aside from the great clash of source powers, the other two methods could only be used once in a short period of time. After he had obtained a clear understanding of his own strength and the strength of his opponent, Ling Han did not waste any more time. Boom! A terrifying force burst out of his body, surging outwards in all directions. Suddenly, the red-robed woman was shattered into bits and turned back into dragon's breath. Ling Han absorbed this streak of dragon's breath, and his cultivation level improved a slight bit further. If I can absorb about 100 streaks, I should be just about able to reach the peak stage of young soul. Moreover, dragon's breath can improve my body in all aspects. Not just the cultivation level, but even brute power will be greatly increased. The indestructible heaven's scroll he cultivated had only increased the toughness of his physique, but when the dragon's breath entered his body, it was as if he had been bestowed the powerful might of a divine dragon, and he could easily strike down the stars in the skies with a light punch. Of course, this was only his misconception. Only a celestial king would be able to accomplish that. After Ling Han absorbed this dragon's breath, he continued forwards. He had not walked too far when he suddenly spotted a flower ahead. Though this looked like a plain, it was actually a bridge, and the path had been paved out with dragon scales. Could flowers actually bloom on this? Ling Han couldn't help but feel surprised, and sped up as he walked towards it. This really was a flower, one as tall as 3 feet. There were only 9 leaves, and the flower was as transparent as crystal, possessing an ethereal air that could not be described with words. Ling Han did not recognize this thing. It was definitely not recorded in all the rare books of celestial medicines and spiritual herbs that he knew of, but he could sense great Tao vibrating within, causing his heartbeat to quicken, and he felt an impulse to go nearer and pluck it. This is the bloom of Tao. Small Tower's voice suddenly rang out. No longer pretending to be mute? Ling Han asked with a smile. Ever since he began studying the great clash of source powers, Small Tower had fallen out with him and did not speak to him at all. And now it actually took the initiative to speak up, which was really an extremely strange thing. Small Tower humphed and said, "The bloom of Tao contains millions and millions of great Tao. It is not a celestial medicine, but is superior to any celestial medicine. Only when a great number of celestial kings have been buried together could it be birthed." Ling Han gave an "oh." Looks like the legend is not false. There are indeed more than 100 immortal dragons buried here. Try as much as possible to retrieve the bloom of Tao. It is extremely helpful for your path of cultivation, Small Tower said seriously. Chapter 2050, Retrieval. Chapter 2050, Retrieval. There was no need for Small Tower to tell him. Ling Han had no plans on missing out on this bloom of Tao, and judging by Small Tower's tone, it seemed like there was not just one bloom of Tao. He walked towards the bloom of Tao, and the flower swayed lightly, as if it was going to disappear into thin air. When Ling Han had come close enough and stretched out his hand to pluck it, a breeze passed, and this celestial flower suddenly turned into uncountable pieces that shot out in all directions and were gone in an instant. What's going on? The bloom of Tao contains a great many celestial king tier-level regulations. By itself, it is in an incredibly fragile state of balance. Thus, when it encounters the slightest external stimulus, it will shatter, Small Tower explained slowly. You clearly knew, yet did not remind me at all. You clearly did it on purpose. Ling Han pointed out. Small Tower did not say anything, and this was considered tacit admission. As expected of the proud tower, proud and petty. Hadn't he just teased it a bit? And it had immediately gotten its payback. Then how am I supposed to retrieve it? Ling Han asked. Try as much as possible to withhold your own aura and not let loose the slightest bit. Small Tower did not act mute this time. Ling Han sighed and continued his advance. Half a day later, no bloom of Tao appeared ahead. Instead, there was another streak of dragon's breath that manifested into a formidable man that aggressively attacked him. Could it be that these people were the celestial kings from the dragon tribe? Ling Han cast Great Clash of Source Powers, which instantly killed this opponent, while he himself spat out a mouthful of blood. To be able to instantly kill an opponent that was superior in strength to him with a single move, the time he had to channel the Great Clash of Source Powers would also be slightly longer. This would cause considerable damage to Ling Han himself, so throwing up blood was really very normal. Thankfully, he immediately channeled the indestructible Heaven Scroll, and the organs that had been damaged immediately recovered. Small Tower couldn't help but say, though I do not approve of your reckless actions, if you hadn't come up with this ultimate move, you would have only been able to flee pathetically when you had encountered the spiritual marks left behind by these celestial kings. Which also meant that these opponents were really those celestial kings of the past, but naturally did not even have 100 millionth of their actual strength. Or rather, they had been forcibly limited to the dividing soul tier. Or perhaps it depended on the individual. If it was a dividing soul tier they faced, they would be limited to the dividing soul tier, and if it was an immortal palace tier, they would be at the immortal palace tier. Ling Han chuckled and said, therefore, my insistence is very reasonable. However, I still cannot agree. Small Tower's tone was very firm. You do not have to take this kind of risk. In the future, if you can advance into the heavenly venerable tier, you will discover that it is completely meaningless to depend on these external powers. I know. Ling Han nodded. However, without sufficiently powerful strength now, I am no match for Ji Wuming. But Ji Wuming is a reincarnated celestial king, and a ninth heaven celestial king at that. It is very normal that you cannot match him now, Small Tower advised. Ling Han shook his head. He would not be able to match Ji Wuming in the severing mundane tier, nor in dividing soul tier, or immortal palace tier. Even after he advanced into celestial king tier, he would still not be able to. He had to go as far as ninth heaven celestial king tier to be able to truly catch up to him. Just how many years would he have to be suppressed for? He could not wait for so long, nor was he the type to. In a battle of equal cultivation levels, he did not want to lose to anyone. Small Tower did not speak anymore. Perhaps it was precisely this kind of character that led to Ling Han's present strength. Without this kind of striving determination to be the best and to follow the prescribed order, Ling Han's apex would perhaps be limited to only ninth heaven celestial king tier. This was already enough for him to smile proudly down on the entire celestial realm, but to really surpass the norm, he had to become a heavenly venerate. Ling Han continued his advance, and after destroying another few streaks of dragon's breath, a second bloom of Tao finally appeared ahead of him. He cautiously advanced, completely concealing his own aura. However, the bloom of Tao was incredibly sensitive. When he had gotten as close as 9 meters, this bloom of Tao began to tremble, as if it was going to disperse at any moment. Ling Han quickly stopped and stretched open his right hand. The regulations of space activated and isolated this part of the heaven and earth. As expected, the bloom of Tao stopped trembling. Ling Han advanced another step forwards, adjusting the regulations of space all the while, and ensuring that he was in a state of emptiness for the whole process. Close, close, close. The bloom of Tao was already close at hand. Ling Han stretched out a hand. The regulations of space wafted. They were clearly visible, yet it also seemed like they did not exist. He had grabbed it. With a thought, Ling Han had stowed the bloom of Tao into the Black Tower. Haha, done. Ling Han did not manage to check out his harvest, but instead continued his advance. There was no need to immediately refine the bloom of Tao, and he would absolutely stow it in the Black Tower first. Furthermore, he could still pass it over to be used by the Empress and the others. He continued his way forwards and destroyed a great many streaks of dragon's breath. At the same time, a great amount of dragon's breath was also tempering his body. His brute power had increased greatly, as if he had truly turned into an immortal dragon himself, capable of moving the heaven and earth with a single movement. Though the giant dragons cultivated regulations, they did not nurture origin power, but rather they would be able to destroy the heavens and earth with the rays of their dragon claws with pure physical power. My physical body is becoming stronger and stronger. In future, I may be able to become a wild beast in human form, capable of destroying the heavens and earth with a single movement. This definitely was just an illusion, unless the dragon's breath he obtained could reach an endless extent. Otherwise, with limited dragon's breath, there was naturally a maximum limit to the power boost he could get. Ling Han suddenly stopped, and he turned around. He had a vague feeling of lingering fear, as if some ultimate enemy was approaching. Only in a short while, a figure appeared from the distance. He seemed to be moving very slowly, but in a few steps, he had already neared considerably. He was dressed all in white, as poised and elegant as a god. It was Ji Wuming. No wonder he would experience a feeling of lingering fear. This was indeed a great enemy, an extremely great enemy. I really had not expected that you, too, would be able to stimulate the Black Dragon Bridge. Ji Wuming seemed slightly surprised. He had been a ninth heaven celestial king in his last life, and had stopped at this cultivation level for innumerable epochs. It was possible that he had cultivated all the regulations that could be cultivated at least once, so he had been able to easily stimulate 9 golden dragon bridges, and subsequently gain the approval of the Black Dragon Bridge. But how did Ling Han manage to do so? He was just in the dividing soul tier, yet could actually equal him in the height of regulations? The precious treasure of a heavenly venerable tier is indeed extraordinary, Ji Wuming stated calmly. In the future, though I, too, may be able to step into this cultivation level, there is no harm in me studying it for reference first. Ling Han humphed and retorted, I fear you won't have that chance. Ji Wuming was not angered, and only slowly said, Young man, do you know how many ninth heaven celestial kings have died in my hands? In the eyes of the world, celestial kings were the utmost supreme existence, and ninth heaven celestial kings were the great monarchs among celestial kings. Each and every single one of them could rule the ages, and they were truly invincible in the world. However, Ji Wuming was able to kill ninth heaven celestial kings, so just how powerful had he been at the time? Ling Han showed no signs of weakness and retorted, "Why does a real man need to boast about his past achievements? And when I advance into Celestial King, killing ninth heaven celestial kings will definitely be a small matter to me as well." Ha 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 ha. Ji Wuming suddenly burst out into laughter, shaking his head, and said, "Do you think just anyone can become a ninth heaven celestial king? Those that can advance into this cultivation level would have to be monarchs among monarchs, and all of them would be unprecedentedly talented and genius prodigies." "Fine, I won't speak of my past achievements." He stopped his laughter as his eyes became fixed on Ling Han. "You should hand over the treasure you possess now." "Ji Wuming, I, too, anticipate exchanging blows with you again very much." Ling Han's heroic spirit soared. Your only fate will be death." Ji Wuming charged over, a green sword appearing in his hands. An ancient seal was emblazoned on it, and it exuded a supreme might. Chapter 2051, Equally Matched. Chapter 2051, Equally Matched. The green sword was as transparent as crystal, an ancient seal glowing slightly on it, possessing a frightening aura that could cut the heaven and earth. Immediately, a strong feeling of warning rose up in Ling Han. He felt that if he was struck by this sword, his arm would be severed if it struck his arm, his leg would be severed if it struck his leg, and if it struck his neck, he would be dead. He did not dare take it head-on. With repeated taps of his feet, he used lightning flash and rapidly retreated, as if he himself was a bolt of lightning. However, while he retreated very quickly, Ji Wuming's pursuit was not the slightest bit slow, either. The green sword danced and waved, shooting out multiple streaks of terrifying sword chi. Shwa, shwa, shwa. Even the dimension itself was cut to bits, releasing a wail of grief, as if it was about to be destroyed. This sword was too extraordinary. "This is the severed passion sword," Ji Wuming stated calmly. "A celestial tool that I forged when I advanced into Celestial King tier. It has fought battles with me for many years, but after I advanced into the ninth heaven Celestial King tier, I buried the severed passion sword. To cut through your physique, I have deliberately dug out the severed passion sword once more. You can also feel honored." A celestial tool? Realization dawned on Ling Han. No wonder he instinctively felt fear, and that he could not be touched by this sword. As it turned out, this was a celestial tool. Thankfully, Ji Wuming was also unable to unleash the full might of the divine sword. Otherwise, if the celestial tool exploded with might, to say nothing of the fact that Ling Han was only a dividing soul tier, even if he was an ascending origin tier great elite, he would only be killed with a single strike. In Ji Wuming's hands, even a celestial tool was only an incredibly sharp and indestructible weapon. It could not be considered a genuine celestial tool. Of course, if he could easily unleash its might without reservations, Ling Han also had the previous tool of a heavenly venerate. If the Tower of Three Realms showed its might, even celestial kings would probably have to call out for help. Right. That's right. If I show my might, even a ninth heaven celestial king would be no match. Small Tower declared proudly. However, its next words disappointed Ling Han. "However, firstly, I am severely wounded and not yet recovered, and secondly, I cannot be discovered by a few old monsters, so you will have to depend on yourself now." "Fuck your sister." Ling Han shook his head. Small Tower was really too undependable. He dodged continuously, and would occasionally launch a powerful offensive from afar as well, exerting pressure on Ji Wuming. However, their present strength was actually considerably close, and only a true close-quarters battle would have might. Hence, Ling Han's barrage of punches only managed to hinder Ji Wuming slightly, but was completely unable to change this situation in which he was being beaten down on. How was he going to match the severed passion sword? Ling Han pondered the question internally. Use the divine demon sword to parry? No way. He immediately shook his head. The divine demon sword was presently only the equivalent of a 4-star pseudo-celestial tool. In front of a true divine sword, it was definitely going to be snapped with a single strike. How was he going to parry? Great clash of source powers. Ling Han still shook his head. To deal with a most powerful opponent like Ji Wuming, he had to draw the distance between the two of them close enough, and then unleashing a powerful move would truly create the expected effects. Otherwise, it would only be able to cause light injury. You are very extraordinary. If this was several million years ago, I would take you as my disciple and teach you earnestly, placing all my hopes on you. Ji Wuming moved with sword in hand, his white robes fluttering elegantly, his graceful bearing captivating. Unfortunately, I am no longer who I once was. Ji Wuming formed a hand sign, and his sword intent immediately swept out like a flood, with sword chi like waves, madly slicing towards Ling Han. Even though it was just sword chi, that was an assault launched from a celestial tool, so every single streak was incredibly terrifying. Pu, pu, pu. These sword chi were too close to one another, and Ling Han could not dodge them completely no matter what he did. Immediately, his arms, legs, and lower abdomen were struck, rivers of blood flowing out. He couldn't help but feel astonished. This was still the result when had even been actively channeling the indestructible heaven scroll and boosted his defenses greatly. Otherwise, these sword chi would have sliced him to bits. A celestial tool was truly a celestial tool. Even if it was still dormant, merely the slightest bit of aura sweeping out was incredibly frightening. No wonder a celestial king was high and lofty, and even ascending origin tiers could only admire them. They really were too powerful. And now, you can die, Ji Wuming declared menacingly. His face was expressionless as he planned to kill Ling Han, a super prodigy. Shua, the sword swept out like an eternal mountain that supported the heaven and earth, planning to destroy everything. Ling Han roared furiously and suddenly brandished a fist, which he launched at the severed passion sword. Ji Wuming's eyes narrowed. Had this brat gone mad? He actually planned to use his physical body to bear up against a celestial tool? Did he think he was a celestial king? Crack! The severed passion sword struck Ling Han's fist, yet a majestic light that could induce blindness burst out. One after another, seals lit up, from the size of the palm of a hand to the size that could envelop the heaven and earth, and rippled out for millions and millions of miles. The sword had been blocked. What? Even Ji Wuming looked surprised. He definitely did not believe that Ling Han could stand forcefully against the severed passion sword with his mere physical body, but the truth was the exact opposite. Could it be that he could distrust his own eyes? And Ji Wuming's eyes focused on a black ring that Ling Han wore on his middle finger. It was plain and unadorned, looking like any ordinary metal, but the blade of the severed passion sword had been blocked because it had landed precisely on this ring. It actually managed to block the sharpness of a celestial tool. This also had to be a celestial tool. If it wasn't a celestial tool, it definitely had to be divine metal. Otherwise, it definitely wouldn't be able to accomplish this. I have really underestimated you. Ji Wuming withdrew the sword, his eyes burning hot. You are a man of great fortune. Ling Han's heart was also beating madly. He knew that the black ring was extraordinary, and even the divine demon sword could not swallow it. It was very possibly divine metal, but that had only been his deduction. Furthermore, even if it was divine metal, this thing was too small. Whether it could protect even his whole fist was a mystery. However, he had not been willing to admit defeat, and was not willing to be suppressed by Ji Wuming. Ultimately, he decided to make a risky attempt. The result was unexpectedly excellent. Are you jealous? Ling Han waved his fist, his fighting spirit blazing. The true battle had only begun now. Ji Wuming smiled slightly. I need not feel jealous. As long as I kill you, everything of yours will belong to me. Making empty boasts again. Ling Han shook his head. Ji Wuming, how many times have we exchanged blows by now? And just how many times have you said you would kill me? And what was the result? Aren't I still alive and kicking here? This time, it is me who will kill you." With a roar, Ling Han took the initiative to move. He launched a furious punch, and xiao, 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 endless streaks of sword chi surged out. He used the heaven-destroying 9 swords. "You are but a mere dividing soul tear," Ji Wuming said disdainfully, brandishing the sword in his right hand in a quick dance, while his left hand sent out a palm strike. The palm of his hand had become an inky darkness, as if it had condensed innumerable dimensions, such that even the air was folding on itself. Boom! He pushed out his palm, and this inky darkness spread out, turning into a frightening force. Ling Han felt his chest become muffled and almost suffocated. What a frightening attack! This Ji Wuming was really too strong. Every slight movement from him could release a celestial technique, and it was a high-level celestial technique at that. He had been a 9th heaven celestial king previously, and who knew how many epochs he had plateaued for at this cultivation level, so the celestial techniques he had grasped had to be terrifying in number. Ling Han channeled the indestructible heaven scroll, and multiple seals of great Tao appeared around him. His battle cry did not cease as he waved his fists in a continuous barrage of assault. Pong, pong, pong. As Ling Han's strength rapidly increased, the normal battle prowess of the two of them had finally reached a state of balance, but Ji Wuming was superior as he had really grasped too many celestial techniques, and was more proficient and meticulous in his use of regulations as well. In the slightest moment of carelessness, Ling Han could possibly sustain a painful attack. Come! Yet Ling Han took the initiative to attack. With a tremor of his figure, the 9 heavens flame-divided soul was summoned out. The 9 heavens flame-divided soul also released a battle cry, and wielding the divine demon sword, it joined forces with Ling Han, launching a combined offensive towards Ji Wuming. Chapter 2052. Injuring Ji Wuming severely. Chapter 2052. Injuring Ji Wuming severely. Ling Han hadn't summoned the 9 heavens flame-divided soul previously, because the severed passion sword in Ji Wuming's hands was really too sharp, capable of severing everything. Thus, even if he had summoned the 9 heavens flame-divided soul, it would have been meaningless. But it was different now. He could use the black ring to block the severed passion sword, and the 9 heavens flame-divided soul would then be able to unleash the might that he should have. Furthermore, no matter what, the divine demon sword was still a 4-star pseudo-celestial tool, which was enough to pose a great threat even to a heaven soul tier. Even if you, Ji Wuming, are a reincarnated 9th heaven celestial king, just try having the divine demon sword strike you once. It's guaranteed that you will enjoy it. The two Ling Han joined forces in their attack against Ji Wuming. The main body was mainly focused on defense, blocking the majority of Ji Wuming's attacks. The black ring was completely capable of matching the sharpness of the severed passion sword, and the 9 heavens flame-divided soul would then take the opening to attack madly. As the dividing 9 souls struck, its might was amazingly strong. This has finally gotten a little interesting. Ji Wuming was forced to retreat continuously for more than 100 steps, but not the slightest bit of shock leaked into his expression. Instead, aside from a sliver of languidness in his expression, there was finally a little seriousness. "Fire!" he stated softly, and a sharp blade made of flames suddenly appeared in his left hand. Multiple seals of great Tao could be seen flickering in the flames. His twin swords slashed out continuously, and the severed passion sword in his right hand faced Ling Han's main body, whilst the flaming sword in his left hand targeted the 9 heavens flame-divided soul. The flaming sword blocked the divine demon sword. Ling Han couldn't help but feel surprised. A mere sword of flames that had formed through regulations could block the divine demon sword. This was really inconceivable. There is a lot more that you don't know. Ji Wuming smiled slightly, his twin swords slashing out rapidly, beginning a fierce counterattack. He was incredibly aggressive and channeled another celestial technique. The character appeared on his forehead, emanating an aura capable of suppressing eternity. Without summoning a divided soul, he actually managed to battle both Ling Han's to a tie. Descend! Ji Wuming exclaimed softly, his mouth spitting out a word, and boosting his power of regulation while turning into a massive seal that pressed down on Ling Han. Wang, it was as if this character had come from the ancient primitive times, bringing with it an endless feeling of age. The Ji Wuming of this moment was like an invincible great emperor, capable of suppressing all with a wave of his hand. "Fuck you!" Ling Han also shouted. Boom! The power of regulation he had grasped exploded, blasting out towards that descend character. "Humph! In front of my 9 figures of truth, everything is only useless arrogance." Ji Wuming scoffed. The descend character had boosted the regulations of the great Tao that could not be described, easily destroying everything as it continued to press down on Ling Han. The 9 heavens flame-divided soul brandished the divine demon sword, slashing out towards the descend character. Chong! The strike actually created sparks of fire from the friction, as if it was not just a seal in the air, but rather something formed from divine metal. Chong, chong, chong. After repeatedly slashing a few times, a chip was finally created on this descend character. The 9 heavens flame-divided soul took the initiative to charge out, and next came Ling Han. Both of them shouted loudly as they charged towards Ji Wuming. "Force!" Ji Wuming spat out another word. Ling Han and the 9 heavens flame-divided soul used the same move, and used the divine demon sword to hack away at the obstruction, continuing their advance. "Fight!" Ji Wuming spat out the third word, a smirk hovering at the corners of his lips. When he spat out all the 9 figures of truth, it would create a qualitative change and turn into a super strong attack. Meanwhile, he himself would accumulate power for an opportune attack. The severed passion sword had already locked down on Ling Han's neck. By that time, the 9 figures of truth would also restrict the black ring, and his severed passion sword would then be able to sever Ling Han's head extremely easily. Just like Ling Han had said, Ji Wuming had repeatedly been unable to kill Ling Han. Thus, now that this goal was about to be accomplished, he actually felt a slight feeling of anticipation, just like he felt when he had first killed a celestial king after becoming a celestial king himself. His blood that had long since turned icy cold boiled slightly, and the one mark appeared in both his eyes, the aura of a great emperor increasingly heavy and dense. One. All. Wave. Align. At. Front. When Ji Wuming spat out the final front word, the characters that had been broken up previously regained form from the ground and the air, and merged with the front character, which then turned into a streak of golden light that pressed down towards Ling Han. This suppression felt like it was a whole world that was pressing down on Ling Han, and instantly rendered Ling Han completely incapable of movement. His arms could not move, his legs could not move, and his head could not move. Ji Wuming charged over, the severed passion sword rapidly slashing out at Ling Han's throat. The 9 heavens flame-divided soul approached, but was blocked by his flaming sword. Meanwhile, the severed passion sword continued its slash without the slightest bit of hesitation. When this strike was about to reach its target, Ling Han showed a hint of a smile. Suddenly, Ji Wuming's heart jolted, and a feeling of foreboding rose up in him. However, the strike was already launched, and even he could not retrieve it, and could only move with the flow. Boom! A frightening shock wave of power exploded from Ling Han's body, as if it was going to destroy the heaven and earth. So what if the world's 9 figures of truth had manifested? They were instantly blasted into dust. Ling Han raised a hand, protecting his throat, and the endless shock wave continued its way to surge out in all directions. *T. Ji Wuming gritted his teeth and forcibly withdrew his left hand. The flaming sword disappeared in a flash, and his fingers pressed lightly. Instantly, the primitive aura of time surged out. The shock wave surged out madly, and Ling Han stumbled, suddenly spitting out 3 mouthfuls of golden blood. He felt as if his organs were completely boiled over, and at least 20-odd of his bones had broken. To ensure that there was enough destructive power, Ling Han had dragged out the time to build up power for the great clash of source powers slightly, and in the end, it had caused tremendous damage even to himself. The 9 heavens flame-divided soul stood still, his hand wielding the divine demon sword, and his eyes fixed on the far distance. Ji Wuming was presently kneeling on one knee. Duh. Blood was continuously dripping from his left shoulder. Upon closer look, his whole left arm was completely gone, and the robes he was wearing were torn and battered, and there were now at least a few dozen wounds on him. His left arm had been severed by the divine demon sword, while the injuries to his body had been caused by the impact from the great clash of source powers. Previously, he had forcefully withdrawn the offensive of the 9 heavens flame-divided soul and unleashed a secret technique for self-protection. In the end, the great clash of source powers had not killed the person, but his left shoulder had been severed by the divine demon sword. This was the one and only time Ling Han had managed to wound Ji Wuming in their battle, but Ling Han did not look the slightest bit pleased with himself. After expending so much effort, he had also used the great clash of source powers like the explosive burst of an unexpected move, but he actually still did not manage to kill the other party. In truth, if it were not that he had a divided soul, and had the help of the divine demon sword, that attack would still not have been able to inflict a serious injury on Ji Wuming. Why didn't Ji Wuming use his divided soul? Otherwise, if it had been divided soul versus divided soul, and main body versus main body, Ling Han would definitely have fallen into a disadvantage. Ji Wuming stood up. He glanced at his empty left shoulder and showed a rueful expression as he said, "I never thought that I had actually underestimated you and caused myself to sustain a little injury. What a miscalculation." Ling Han did not dare be careless. Though Ji Wuming had lost an arm, and it would temporarily affect his battle prowess, for prodigies like themselves, as long as they were not completely dead, one definitely could not be careless. Who knew what kind of ultimate move would suddenly burst out of him? Furthermore, when Ji Wuming had dispelled the blast force of the great clash of source powers, he had been clearly using the 2 powers of regulations of time and space. Moreover, he had managed to completely fuse the 2 together to perfection, causing part of the attack's force to go back to the past, a part to go to the future, a part to be sealed off by space, and had launched out in a total of 4 waves. In that manner, the might would naturally be weakened, so he would be able to save his life under such a massive blast. "Why don't you use your divided soul?" Ling Han asked darkly. Chapter 2053, Evenly Matched. Chapter 2053, Evenly Matched. Ji Wuming smiled arrogantly. "Do I need to use a divided soul against you?" These words were very haughty and very arrogant, but also very much like what Ji Wuming would say. As a reincarnated 9th heaven celestial king, he had the right, and should also be this domineering in character. Yet Ling Han gave an "oh" and said, "It is only your main body that has entered here, while your divided soul has gone somewhere else." Ji Wuming paused slightly. He had not expected Ling Han to be so sensitive. He nodded and said, "That's right. Now that I have a divided soul, I should do some more work and obtain more fated opportunities." As expected of Ji Wuming, this kind of feeling surged up in Ling Han's heart. When the other party lacked a divided soul, he could still battle Ling Han to a stalemate. Even though he presently had the upper hand, that had been because he had caught Ji Wuming off guard. If he wanted to kill the other man, it would be extremely difficult. Of course, it would also be incredibly difficult for Ji Wuming to kill Ling Han. For those that had reached heights like they had, it was difficult to decide the victor, and even more difficult to kill their opponent. Die. Ji Wuming bore injuries, but he was also even more formidable than before. It was like the bloodshed had excited him, causing him to regain his fighting spirit. Boom, boom, boom. The 2 absolute monarch tears burst into a great battle. The one character in Ji Wuming's eyes blazed brightly, boosting him with endless power, and made him incredibly terrifying. Ling Han did not show weakness either. Since he had already used the great clash of source powers, he also used it repeatedly, exerting a great pressure on Ji Wuming. As expected, Ji Wuming was really a supreme prodigy, one who used to be a 9th heaven celestial king. Though the great clash of source powers could make Ji Wuming very wary, he had already found a way to deal with it, and that was using the regulations of space and time to distribute the impact. Before Celestial King Tier, the regulations of space and time could overwhelm any single regulations of the 5 elements. Though Ling Han had made use of the resonance of the 4 source powers, he lacked one of the 5 elements, so the might was considerably weaker as well. In summary, this was still not enough to suppress Ji Wuming. Ling Han couldn't help but feel astonished. It should be known that Ji Wuming presently was still not in his prime state. He still had a divided soul that had yet to enter the battle, and even then, he could still battle Ling Han to a tie, which meant that the latter was still no match for Ji Wuming. A reincarnated 9th Heaven Celestial King was really too difficult to deal with, for he was overwhelmingly strong. This battle continued for 3 days and 3 nights. The 2 great monarch tiers used all methods they could, launching powerful moves with every movement. If it had been any other person, even if it was a Heaven Soul Tier monarch tier, they would probably have been killed by now. The great clash of source powers, the severed passion sword, and so on were too frightening in their might. Both of them stopped at the same time, facing off against one another. If it was not because I have to kill you, I really would like to befriend you, Ji Wuming said smilingly, his fighting spirit still blazing hotly. You are indeed the strongest opponent I have faced. Ling Han nodded, showing an expression of respect. Aside from Ji Wuming, there had been no other person that could fill him with such a feeling of pressure. Furthermore, in a situation in which their cultivation levels were equal, Ji Wuming was the first opponent that Ling Han had not been able to defeat, and was the only one too. I cannot kill you this time. We will battle another day. Ji Wuming was also very decisive. Even if they continued fighting, it would only be a waste of time. With his great skill and strategy, he naturally could not possibly waste his time here. He turned around, and as his figure rose, he soon disappeared into the distance. Ling Han did not set out in pursuit. Ji Wuming couldn't kill him, and he couldn't kill Ji Wuming either. Continuing the battle was absolutely meaningless. He was going to get the 5th source power of heaven and earth as soon as possible, and it had to be earth element at that so that the great clash of source powers could unleash its strongest might. In this battle, my stamina was also very crucial. Ling Han did not continue his journey at the first moment, but rather summed up a conclusion from the previous battle. Perhaps Ji Wuming did not need it, because there were really too many prodigies he had fought, but Ling Han was different. It was the first time he had encountered as troublesome an opponent as Ji Wuming, and would need to ensure he attained perfection in all details. If I had stronger stamina, I would be able to attack faster. At first, I would be able to deliver 10,000 punches in a single breath, and in the future, it could be increased to 11,000, 12,000, or even 20,000 to 30,000. After 3 days, Ling Han finally stood up and continued to advance. Soon, a streak of dragon's breath appeared ahead of him. It took human form, and its manifestation was not affected just because Ji Wuming had already passed this way once. Ling Han did not directly use the great clash of source powers, but rather used this opponent to enrich his own battle prowess. Previously, he had summarized what he had learnt for so long, so there should be a little improvement. However, with the prerequisite that he didn't use the great clash of source powers, he was still no match for this streak of dragon's breath. Still, compared to before, he had indeed achieved a certain degree of improvement. He should not waste any more time. Ling Han channeled the great clash of source powers. Boom! The wild waves of regulations surged out, and this streak of dragon's breath was instantly dispersed. I need even more dragon's breath. He barged his way through, searching for more dragon's breath. However, there seemed to be a rhythm here. After he had passed, there would not be new dragon's breath birthed on his path, no matter how many times he passed back and forth. Not only was it this case for dragon's breath, it was the same for the bloom of Tao. Ling Han did not believe that Ji Wuming would choose not to pluck any bloom of Tao if he had passed any. He cautiously used the regulations of space to split off the space that he was in as he retrieved this bloom of Tao. Ling Han gained an understanding. The dragon bridge was actually a kind of bestowal, but the prerequisite was you had to be able to retrieve it. For different dragon bridges, the strength of the dragon's breath should also be different, and there should not be any bloom of Tao on the other dragon bridges. At least Ling Han had not heard Fuyu and the others say anything about it. Ling Han walked along the bridge. Unless he channeled the indestructible heaven scroll, his feet would still be pricked uncomfortably, so he wanted to stay longer on this bridge and retrieve more dragon's breath and blooms of Tao, but at the same time he hoped to quickly reach the end so he would not need continue to endure this suffering. Whether he was willing or not, the dragon bridge had finally shown him its end 3 months later. Ling Han could see a gigantic dragon's head biting onto the other side of the cliff. Each of its dragon's whiskers fluttered elegantly, exuding a captivating air of dominance. In these 3 months, his cultivation level had already reached the peak stage of Yang Soul tier, and his stamina had also been increased to a terrifying extent, so he could wrestle with Heaven Soul tier. However, Celestials tended to contest in regulations, while origin power and stamina were only secondary, no matter how strong you were in these aspects. But stronger stamina meant that you would be able to move faster and last longer, so there was naturally only benefit and no disadvantage to possessing it. Ling Han leaped down from the dragon's head, and when he turned his head, the dragon bridge had disappeared from sight. This also meant that he could not go back the way that he had come, and could only forge his way ahead. Ji Wuming was faster than him. A feeling of urgency rose up in Ling Han's heart, but he did not move out immediately. Instead, he sat down cross-legged here, waiting for Hunyo and the others. In this place, the 3,000 dragon heads converged, and as long as they managed to cross the bridge, they would all reunite here. However, it was not everyone that was qualified to reach this place. The weak would be eliminated at the first instant. Ling Han sat as steady as a mountain, and there would occasionally be people coming off from the dragon bridge, passing him by. Some would stride past him, rushing on their way, while some would stop and look at him for a while, curious about why Ling Han was seated here. Ling Han. 2 days later, a delicate and charming young girl leaped down from the dragon's head, suddenly leaping into Ling Han's arms. Who else could it be but Hunyo? The little girl clung to Ling Han's arms, her arms hooked around his neck. Did Ling Han miss Nyo? Of course I did, Ling Han said smilingly. Let's leave quickly so we can take the chance to lose those 2 great witches. The little girl's eyes were wide, her face filled with anticipation. Chapter 2054, Plains. Chapter 2054, Plains. Ling Han couldn't help but feel speechless. This little girl was really the jealous type. Even after having spent so many years with the Empress and the others, she had not changed her original aspirations. Whenever she got the chance, she would want to monopolize him. Be good. He rubbed Hunyo's head. Hunyo pouted, appearing very unhappy. However, Ling Han soon made her smile again as she related her experiences on the dragon bridge. As expected, she had also encountered dragon's breath, but there were no blooms of Tao. Going by that reasoning, it was possible that there would be no dragon's breath on the normal bridges, or the dragon's breath would be pitifully weak. The 2 of them waited for a while, and then they saw the Empress step off the dragon's head with an incredibly graceful bearing. Her charms were incomparable, and could easily make anyone submit to her. Hunyo, big witch. Hunyo pouted her little mouth, appearing very displeased about seeing her. Another 2 days later, bewitching Maiden Ro also appeared. Ling Han looked at her, and the corner of his mouth involuntarily twitched. Bewitching Maiden Ro had not come alone, but was rather surrounded by at least a dozen men. Furthermore, every single one of the men had an ingratiating expression on his face, as if they wanted nothing more than to surrender their very souls for her. When she spotted Ling Han, bewitching Maiden Ro couldn't help but smile dazzlingly, a hint of pride curling up the corners of her lips. See, what do you think of my charms? Let's go. Ling Han did not even give her any regard. His left arm wrapped around the Empress, his right held Hunyo's small hand, and he turned and left. Wait for me. Bewitching Maiden Ro hurriedly leaped off the dragon's head and chased after Ling Han, which made those over dozen men show expressions of jealousy and hatred. What right did he have? They had curried favor with her throughout the journey and fought to step in front of her whenever there was danger. Meanwhile, Ling Han clearly did not do anything at all, yet their goddess still chased after him. How could they tolerate that? Hold it right there. A young man leaped out, standing in the path of Ling Han and the others. Ling Han smiled slightly and said, "Step aside. If you had the ability, how could I manage to block your way?" This man declared proudly. He was clearly provoking him. "Scram!" Hunyo ordered. Pong! She shot out a punch, and that man was instantly sent flying. In a mere instant, all that was left of him was a tiny black dot. "Do any of you still want to block the way?" The little girl swept a glance at those remaining, her eyes extremely fierce. Those remaining hurriedly shook their heads in unison. They all felt glad that they had not been that rash. Otherwise, they would have ended just like the man just now. There were regulations of gravity here causing suppression. No one was capable of flying here. Thus, after having been sent flying so high, it was very likely that he might be smashed to bits upon landing. By then, he would definitely be deader than dead. Ling Han smiled and set off again, his hands holding the hands of the two women with him. Bewitching Maiden Ro hurriedly set off in pursuit. Her head was low, looking like a little wife who had been wronged. This side of the cliff was connected to an expansive plain. This time, it really was a plain. The grass was half a foot high, and there was no end in sight. It looked like a green ocean. And in the endless distance, there was a divine dragon hovering in the skies. Even if there was an endless distance between them, they could still sense waves of dragons might spreading out, causing one's heart to soar and submit. However, this was not a real divine dragon, but rather a mountain peak. It was just incredibly steep, so it looked like a dragon. Ling Han and his party then set out towards that divine dragon mountain. This was also the direction in which the others were heading. This plain was really too wide. Even if they were advancing in the same direction, they soon were separated. Just like the myriad of stars dotting the skies, they were also scattered all over this plain, the distance between them farther and farther. They continued forwards. In any case, there was that divine dragon-like mountain acting as a landmark ahead of them, so there was no need to worry that you would lose your way. This ocean-like plain felt very novel to them at first, but when enough time passed, they naturally would be bored of it. Roar! All of a sudden, a black shadow streaked out from the bushes. That was a black panther, its body covered in purple-colored light patterns, and as it pounced, there was a beauty of brilliant lights and flowing colors coming from it. It aimed straight for Bewitching Maiden Ro. Bewitching Maiden Ro was annoyed. Its first target of attack was her. Did it think that she was going to be an easy target? Haha. Ling Han laughed loudly. You are indeed the easiest to bully. He did not move, because this black panther wasn't too strong. Bewitching Maiden Ro exclaimed softly, and moved to counterattack the black panther. Pong, pong, pong. Human and panther were embroiled in an intense battle, and it was actually very hard to tell which of them was better. This black panther was at Ein Sol, having very strong battle prowess close to the standards of King tiers. Thus, even if Bewitching Maiden Ro was an Emperor tier, and could still be invincible even with a gap of a minor level, she was still unable to defeat it, at least not very soon. Hunyo was yawning in boredom. Watching this kind of battle was making her very sleepy. Which Ro? Nyo's coming to help you. She shot out a punch. Pa! This black panther was instantly sent flying. Ling Han and the Empress both looked surprised, because the black panther actually hadn't been killed by Hunyo. Since the little girl had already moved, she had to have calculated the strength of this black panther. She should have killed the black panther directly with a single punch, but the result was completely different. This punch had only sent the black panther flying. This defense was quite amazing. Pong! The black panther crashed into the bushes. It struggled to get back on its feet and just barely managed to. Though it had not died, Hunyo had still inflicted a serious injury on it. Who asked you to bully me? Bewitching Maiden Ro pounced and struck heavy blows to it. Now that the Black Panther had sustained serious injury, it naturally could only be beaten submissively in her hands. But even so, it had still been hit at least 100 times before finally dying. This hide is really tough. Ling Han walked over. He tried out the defenses of the Black Panther, and it had reached about Earth-Solan level. No wonder it only came off with a severe injury even after bearing a blow from Hunyo. Nyo wants to eat roast meat. Hunyo was beginning to drool. Ling Han skinned and removed the tendons of the Black Panther, yet surprisingly discovered a crystal in the Black Panther's head. It was green and translucent, and dragon's might was vaguely seeping from it. Why would there be dragon's might? The four of them were all surprised. This is the 100 Dragons Mystery Realm, where, it is said, 100 divine dragons have been buried. They were all celestial king tiers. In that case, there would definitely be a considerable amount of benefits left behind, enough to cause a transformation in the living creatures here, Ling Han deduced. Is this edible? Hunyo stared at the crystal and licked her lips. This little girl judged if an object was useful or not by seeing if it was edible or not. This is a dragon crystal. Its effects are weaker than those of dragon's breath, but it still has some benefits after refining. Small Tower suddenly spoke up. Oh, was that right? Ling Han put the dragon crystal away. Since it was useful, it naturally could not be wasted. They continued onwards and saw the Great Plain was gradually disappearing, and the rise and fall of mountains had appeared in front of them. There were also small patches of forest and craggy rocks scattered all over. No wonder a Black Panther had appeared just now. As it turned out, they had entered the area of a mountainous forest. A harsh cry rang out, and they saw a massive golden condor fly across the skies. However, its claws were very strange. They were not the normal claws of birds, but rather 5-clawed dragon paws. Golden light was reflecting from them, as if they were metallic in nature. This harsh cry turned into a blade that sliced over at Ling Han and his party. It was about as long as a mile. As the blade swiped past, large swathes of trees were violently cut down, and nothing could stop its advance. Ling Han humphed and clenched his hands into fists. Then, he too gave a loud shout. Boom! A frightening storm of energy surged out from his body, pouring out diagonally ahead of them. Great clash of source powers. As the storm of energy surged past, a cone-shaped area of vacuum suddenly appeared ahead of them, and the sound wave blade that the golden condor had shot out was also broken, sweeping past on either side of Ling Han and the others without causing the slightest bit of harm. Chapter 2055, Strange Dragon Crystal. Chapter 2055, Strange Dragon Crystal. When the golden condor saw that its attack had had no effect, it involuntarily released another cry. However, this time it did not release any soundwave blade. It was just a furious cry, as if it was wondering why it had not managed to kill Ling Han and his party with this attack. It was extremely fast. With a quick flap of wings, it had already disappeared in the distance, but it was soon followed by a quick turn. It had immediately flown back, gliding in the skies, but considerably slower now. The golden condor glared at Ling Han and his group, its eyes glittering with coldness. Suddenly, it released another sharp cry that turned into 4 sound wave blades that struck out towards Ling Han, the Empress, Hunyo, and Bewitching Maiden Ro, respectively. It was still not giving up. Ling Han moved, and it was still great clash of source powers. A frightening storm of energy exploded, and the 4 sound wave blades were once again destroyed. This golden condor was a heaven soul, yet the force of its attack had far surpassed that level. It was very possible that it was an emperor tier, or even monarch tier. Thus, to say nothing of how the Empress and Hunyo would not be a match for it, even Ling Han could not possibly match it if he did not use the great clash of source powers. Get down here! Ling Han shouted at the skies. The regulations of gravity here were too chaotic, so he could not fly. The golden condor paid no attention to it and merely circled around in the skies, occasionally releasing another sound wave blade. After repeating this for quite a few times, the golden condor finally understood that this could not possibly kill Ling Han. Then, with a flap of its wings, it streaked through the skies. This time, it did not fly back after flying off. Ling Han and the others were very displeased. Though they had not sustained any damage, they were naturally irritated after having a feathery animal attack them repeatedly for so many times when they could not counter for the whole while. Unfortunately, aside from winged creatures, there was no one that could fly here. They could do nothing but stare helplessly. Humph, make sure Nyo doesn't find its lair, or Nyo will tear it apart. Nyo fumed. The four of them continued on their way. They did not enter the forest. Who knew what was living inside it? In a mystery realm, one had to be careful at all times because there were some dangers that came from a great many negligible creatures. For example, bugs. They clearly did not have any cultivation level, but were capable of easily piercing through the defenses of elites and injecting fatal poison. And there were also unremarkable weeds that had sawtooth-shaped leaves that could render even the defenses of immortal palace-tier elites ineffective. These leaves also had powerful poison and could kill one easily and imperceptibly. For another example, there were sharp rock spikes on the ground, completely indestructible and with a murderous aura that could destroy vital signs. Thus, if one could avoid going into such unknown surroundings, it was best not to. Roar! A beast roar rang out, and a massive black bear walked out from the rocks. It was as tall as 30 meters, flames burning in its eyes, seeming very formidable. Nyo goes. Nyo was excited at the sight of it, and was the first to rush out. We're having bear paws for lunch. Pung! She had just pounced out when a human figure streaked past, crashed into the rock behind them, and slid down with a creak. This great black bear stood on its hind legs, and was still maintaining the position of delivering a paw strike. The one being struck flying back naturally could only be Nyo. Ow, ow, ow. Nyo gritted her teeth and struggled out of the rock. She had been forcefully embedded into the rock, the impact so harsh that it seemed like all the bones in her body had been crushed. What a strong bear paw, but it should be very delicious. She leaped up and charged off to attack the black bear again. The great black bear used the same move and still delivered a paw strike. However, while Nyo might look unreliable, her battle perception was extremely high, so how could she possibly fall for the same thing twice? With a turn of her figure, shto, she began circling around the great black bear, making maximum use of her agility. What was a rock? As a bird, it could cross 90,000 miles with a single flap of its wings, and its cry rang out through the skies. It was one of the representatives of extreme speed in this world. At this instant, Nyo's images were scattered throughout the area, at least 100 of them. This was because her speed was too high, leaving behind afterimages that looked almost real. Come on, big guy. Nyo is definitely going to munch on your bear paw. The bear paw was constantly in her thoughts. This was the obsession of a glutton. The great black bear snarled. Its cultivation level had already reached the heaven soul, and it itself was a king tier. In terms of strength, it was far superior to Nyo. But the problem here was it could not hit its target at all, so what was the use of its strong battle prowess? Pung, pung, pung. Nyo, on the other hand, kept delivering palm strikes and punches consistently against the black bear. Though she looked pure and cute, she was absolutely harsh and heavy in her attacks. This great black bear was endlessly crying out because of her assault, the flames in its eyes turning into a ball-like form. These two fireballs had been blazing red at first, but they were actually slowly turning darker, and occasionally, a white-colored pattern would appear on them, which appeared very bizarre. A sense of foreboding rose up in Ling Han's heart, and he exclaimed, "Nyo, be careful, never mind. I'll do it." No, Nyo still wants to play. Nyo giggled, and continued to attack the great black bear. Boom! Just at this moment, those two dark-colored balls of light suddenly exploded, turning into a terrifying shock wave. Boom! The surroundings in diameter of 10 miles were all turned into an ocean of flames. There was frightening regulations of fire wreaking havoc there, wanting to burn everything down. Ling Han withdrew his hand. Just now, he had managed to move in time, standing guard in front of the Empress and bewitching Maiden Ro. But as for Hunyo, Nyo is fine. Hunyo giggled. There was a light shield around her. It was a rock that was about to surface from the water, flap its wings and fly. With a soft exclamation from her, this rock flew out, moving to suppress the great black bear. Pong! With a crash, the black bear immediately stumbled and almost tripped. This was the little girl having awakened the bloodline of the rock, but even such a powerful move only made the great black bear stumble, but did not injure it, which showed that the great black bear's strength was really powerful. Attack together. Ling Han, the Empress, and bewitching Maiden Ro all charged over, ganging up on this great black bear with their combined efforts. If Ling Han did not use the great clash of source powers, even he could not be a match for this great black bear. Even if the four of them worked together, that would only be barely enough. They would only be capable of managing a tie. However, Ling Han's physique was tough enough and could completely bear the attack of the great black bear. With him focusing on the assault, tightly attracting all the attack power of the great black bear, the three women were allowed to completely unleash the full force of their assault. After wearing it out for 2 days, they finally managed to kill this great black bear. They all slumped onto the ground, feeling extremely tired. After panting a few times, they all laughed loudly, feeling a happiness they could not describe. Using their own actual strength to kill a fierce beast stronger than themselves gave a very strong feeling of accomplishment. Bear paw, bear paw. Only Hunyo was extraordinarily energetic. She surveyed the great black bear very happily, her drool dripping. Ling Han rested for a while, and then dismembered the great black bear. The 4 bear paws were barbecued on the bonfire, and it was just enough for each of them to have one. The meat of a heaven soul immortal beast was very delicious in the first place. What more when it was something as fine as bear paw? Here's another dragon crystal. He drew out a red dragon crystal from within the brain of the great black bear. There seems to be some kind of design on it. Bewitching Maiden Ro's eyes were quite sharp. The Empress took it over for a look and soon nodded. There is a design, and it has a strong regularity in its pattern, but I can't tell what exactly it is. Ling Han also took it over for observation. This dragon crystal was indeed different from the one that they had gotten previously. There was a very complex vein pattern on the surface, but it was definitely not seals of great Dao. Ling Han was completely able to confirm that fact. Chapter 2056. A great river blocks the path. Chapter 2056. A great river blocks the path. Ling Han put this strange dragon crystal away, and they continued forwards. He could study it slowly, and there was no need to rush things now. For hours later, they encountered another fierce beast, but its strength was much lower. After they killed it, they very naturally obtained another dragon crystal. However, this was a very normal dragon crystal, and there were no strange patterns on it. Could it be that only stronger creatures would produce this kind of patterned dragon crystal? They guessed. This was very easily verified because they encountered a colossal creature not too long after. This was a massive tortoise, and it was slowly crawling in the mountains. However, every step of its feet would cause the mountains and earth to shake, creating an astonishing commotion. Boom! This massive tortoise immediately discovered Ling Han and his group, and immediately placed down a clawed leg. It was like a mountain peak had descended, causing the winds to whistle sharply, and there was a yellow-colored seal glowing beneath its claws. If this seal had not been there, Ling Han and his group could have chosen not to dodge and just allowed it to land on them. No matter how great its power was, it would be useless as it could not harm them at all. At most, they would only be buried into the ground, or simply create a hole in its own foot, as if Ling Han and his group were nails. In front of regulations, pure power was like pure paste, completely meaningless. Thus, all celestials had to cultivate regulations. It was a different story when power had been fused with regulations. That would create a frightening impact. With the support of regulations, power would also unleash the destructive force that it should have. Ling Han shouted, and raised a fist to parry. Boom! A loud bang rang out, and the tortoise's foot landed. Nothing could block its course. When the tortoise's foot rose again, Ling Han and his party were all embedded in the ground, but all of them were completely unwounded. This was because Ling Han had stretched out a shield of origin power, which had cancelled out the impact caused by this stomp from the giant tortoise. Otherwise, aside from Ling Han, the other three women would be throwing up blood. In the case of bewitching Maiden Ro, who was too weak, it was not impossible that she would be directly stomped into mush, either. Boom! The giant tortoise's foot had just risen when it was again descending at a frighteningly rapid speed. It was clearly going to stomp repeatedly and stomp Ling Han and his group into bits. Who asked you to be arrogant? Ling Han summoned the divine demon sword. Man and sword fused as one and shot into the skies. Pooh! A spurt of blood sprayed out, and Ling Han forcefully ripped open the giant tortoise's tough hide, penetrating through the sole of its foot. The divine demon sword unleashed a blazing light, continuing to slash towards the giant tortoise's head. The giant tortoise released a pained roar. With its size, this stab wound from Ling Han was actually no different from being pricked by a needle. It would naturally hurt, but it would only be a momentary pain. But who asked it to have been created by the divine demon sword? This was a future celestial tool, so how overbearing would its destructive force be? At this moment, the murderous aura was wreaking havoc inside the giant tortoise's body. As it surged, the adjacent part of blood and flesh would immediately lose vitality and turn into a mound of dead flesh. Fortunately, the giant tortoise was big enough and could lay down layer after layer of defenses in its body, so the murderous aura left behind by the divine demon sword was continuously weakened and ultimately disappeared. However, it had already turned 1/3 of the giant tortoise's physical body into rotting flesh, showing adequately how terrifying the divine demon sword could be. Ling Han wielded his sword and slashed over. Shwa, 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 the divine demon sword danced madly. This giant tortoise was huge and had terrifying power. If it had been any other person that had encountered it, they would have been really unfortunate. But if it was Ling Han, it would be this giant tortoise that was down on its luck. Its massive body had instead become a very clear target. No matter how Ling Han brandished his sword, he would be able to succeed. So this big guy was soon sprawled out on the ground, turning into a dead tortoise. Cracking its head open, they found a dirt yellow dragon crystal. Upon closer examination, it was covered with patterns. This was another special dragon crystal. The patterns are different, Ling Han said after studying it for a while. The three women all nodded. Though the patterns were complex, and an ordinary person would become dizzy from the sight, this group would be able to completely memorize every single detail of the veined pattern. These weren't seals of great Tao that would be slowly erased from their memory by the heaven and earth after a single glance. Who cares? Let's go, Hunyo said casually. Indeed, they could not distinguish anything, so their only option was to continue forwards. As they headed towards that divine dragon mountain, they killed many more wild beasts on their way. Some gave them ordinary dragon crystals, while others produced special dragon crystals. All in all, they obtained a lot of normal dragon crystals, about 10 times the number of special dragon crystals. After spending a full month, they were finally close to approaching that divine dragon mountain, but their path forwards had disappeared, and they could only stop and stand there. There was no further path, as a massive river had blocked their advance. The river flow was extraordinarily wide. At least, it was not something that anyone could cross with a single leap. Then cross the bridge in a vessel? Ling Han tried to take out the wooden ship stored in the Black Tower, but the moment he tossed it into the river, it was completely corroded. There were multiple seals of great Tao surging in the river waters, and it was these seals of great Tao that easily destroyed the wooden ship. The wooden ship could not survive, and neither could a metal one. Nothing could hold up against the corrosive abilities of the river waters. Perhaps divine metal could, but who would use divine metal to build a ship? Wasn't that a massive waste? Let's walk around. Perhaps there is a bridge, or perhaps we would reach the source. They walked along the great river and passed a great many people on their way. They also encountered a considerable number of people that had walked over from the opposite direction, and this gave Ling Han and his group a sense of foreboding. Perhaps this river flowed in a circle around the entire Divine Dragon Mountain. In that case, they could not possibly walk to the source no matter how much they walked. But without walking a whole round, who would give up? This round was astonishingly huge, and they had walked for a total of 17 days before Ling Han and his party finally returned to where they had originally come from. As expected, the great river was closed, and no path was left. How were they supposed to cross the river then? Wait, no. Ling Han suddenly recalled that he had indeed seen many people as he walked along the great river, but there was also a great many people that he had not seen, like those few super monarch tears. In fact, he had not encountered Du Xiaojun, Long Butian, and the others either. Could it be that these people had been walking ahead of them all this while, and that was why they had not met them all this while? Let's walk another round. This time, Ling Han and his party chose to walk around in the opposite direction. True enough, there were a great many people that had been advancing in the same direction as Ling Han and his group previously, and that was why they had not met. However, now that they had circled around in the opposite direction, they had spotted them, but Tian Qingyue, Yu Huaqing, and the others were still not to be seen. There must be a path that leads to Divine Dragon Mountain here. Thus, those people have all gone to a different location and have not come here to waste time, Ling Han concluded. But where would the other pathway be? With a thought from Ling Han, he drew out those special dragon crystals and examined them closely once more. When these vein patterns are put together, isn't it a map? His mind suddenly buzzed with an idea. Map? What map? Bewitching Maiden Ro asked, just trying to strike up a conversation. Everyone speaks of wanting to ascend Divine Dragon Mountain, but with the great river blocking the way, there is no way to advance at all. Perhaps there is an underground passage that can let us cross the river? Ling Han asked. Then we'll dig our own. Hunyo was energized now. In her eyes, this was something very fun. The little girl was the type to do as she said. However, she had only dug downwards a little when the river waters flowed out. If it were not for the fact that Ling Han had moved fast enough and grabbed the little girl, whom he quickly tossed to one side, she would probably have been corroded by the river waters. Chapter 2057, Halfway Snatched. Chapter 2057, Halfway Snatched. What evil river waters! Almost hurt Nyo. Hunyo was abruptly angered, furious at the river waters. Ling Han smiled and walked forwards as he held Hunyo's hand. Come on, let's kill some more wild beasts. They began a hunting trip. Very soon. This made Hunyo elated again because the little girl had food again. As a glutton, what else could she ask for? One after another, wild beasts collapsed at their feet, producing a large number of dragon crystals for them. Though the majority was ordinary dragon crystals, this thing was still very nutritious and had the amazing effect of aiding them in increasing their comprehension. Who would complain about having too many? Worst come to worst, they could always sell them in exchange for star stones. They obtained more and more special dragon crystals, but it was still far from the map that Ling Han had spoken of. At least for now, it was still a mess, and there was absolutely no way to piece them together. Here's another big guy. 2 months later, they arrived at a small hill. There was a golden lion ahead of them, but it had 3 tails. Upon closer look, each tail actually also bore a head, though they were much smaller and weren't very obvious. What kind of monster was this? Who cares what kind of monster it is? We'll kill it and eat it. Hunyo cried out and was the first to charge out. Ling Han, the Empress, and bewitching Maiden Ro also hurriedly pursued. The coordination among the 4 of them was getting more and more tacit by now. When they joined forces, they could deal with even Heaven Soul Emperor Tears. After all, intelligence was a clear weakness of the wild beasts here. They could be easily led around by the noise. Their superior battle prowess was all for naught, and there was no need to be afraid. The 4 of them besieged it, but still spent close to 8 hours before finally dealing with this big guy. Ling Han had already gone a very long time without using the great clash of source powers, because he also wanted the three women to toughen up as well. Source Power was naturally best trained in actual battle. There's a big guy here. A voice filled with pleased surprise rang out. A group of 7 appeared, and when they discovered that Ling Han and his group were here, they all revealed malevolent expressions. Ling Han's eyes swept over this group and couldn't help but feel surprised because there was actually a person that he knew among this group of 7. Ruan Dongxiang. Strange. Why did he see this guy wherever he went? A yellow-robed, middle-aged man stepped out from the group of 7 and arrogantly demanded, "You guys can scram now." When his gaze swept over Hunyo and the other women, his eyes lit up and he looked stunned, but did not say something along the lines of demanding that the 3 women stay behind. After all, with them being able to kill such a large monster, the strength of these 4 people was definitely extraordinary. If they could avoid conflict, it was best to. Ruan Dongxiang glared hatefully at Ling Han, but he had only managed to join this team by shamelessly currying favor with them, so how could he possibly dare to cause a conflict between these people because of personal grudges? He only prayed secretly that Ling Han would not be willing to compromise. In that case, even if both sides didn't want a battle, there would be no other option. "I don't know how to. Why don't you demonstrate by scramming first for our entertainment?" Ling Han said, smiling slightly. "If others do not offend me, neither will I offend others. But if they do, I will definitely beat them silly." The yellow-robed middle-aged man was momentarily stunned, and then showed a menacing expression. "At first, I wanted to let you guys live, but you have such a bad mouth, and are so determined to seek your own death. What are you being so fierce for, ugly? Come over if you dare, and see how Nyo will deal with you." Hunyo rolled up her sleeves, revealing a pair of forearms as fair as jade, instantly drawing the eyes of the 7. Amazing beyond words and remarkably beautiful. A green-robed man approached from the group of 7 and said to the yellow-robed middle-aged man, "Brother Liu, we don't have to kill these 3 girls, right? If we can capture them, go ahead. If they cannot be captured, we can only kill them." The yellow-robed middle-aged man's expression was vicious. If they were of a mind to capture them alive, they would definitely have reservations when they attacked. Meanwhile, the 4 people on the other side had been able to kill a giant-sized wild beast, so their strength could not be weak. Thus, even though they had more in numbers, the moment they had reservations in their attacks, it was very easy for the tables to turn on them. That was why he had said they could capture them if it was possible for them to be captured. If they could not, then they could only kill them. "Even if they're dead, don't waste them. I have a use for them," a man in black said. His face was thin and wizened like an old man's, but this was clearly a place only people below 10 million years old could enter. He had probably cultivated some kind of evil cultivation technique which caused this kind of change in his body. Hearing him say these words, even his companions showed expressions of disgust. They knew very well that when this man was cultivating or sleeping, he would be embracing a dead body. He was practically a monster. However, this man's strength was also incredible. Otherwise, they would not have brought him by their side. Merely looking at this kind of person would cause one's eyes to hurt. The Empress revealed a menacing expression. With her pride, she felt that everyone in this world should grovel beneath her feet, but now someone actually dared to disrespect her. She was naturally angered at this. "At first, I just planned to teach you a lesson. After all, we do not have any kind of serious enmity between us, but now..." Ling Han paused, his killing intent beginning to flow out. "Charge! Charge! Charge!" The yellow-robed, middle-aged man shouted loudly. Instantly, the 7 of them leaped out at the same time, launching an offensive towards Ling Han and his group. Ruan Dongxiang's expression was filled with malevolence, and a sliver of delight was present in his gaze. On the way here, he clearly knew that these 6 companions were all peak-stage heaven souls. Though they had not even reached the extent of being a king tier, there were as many as 6 of them here. How huge would their battle prowess together be? Even the strongest in Ling Han and his party was only at Yang Soul. Even if he was a monarch tier, he could only be invincible against an earth soul. How could they match those at the heaven soul? What more the peak stage of the Heaven Soul? In a battle of 6 against 4, that naturally would mean a sure victory. He was also very impressed with himself. He had finally found very strong backers, and would only need to cheer them on from the sidelines in any moment of trouble. Trash, accept your deaths. Hunyo leaped out and struck violently. However, if it was her alone, she was far from being a match for these 6 people. Very soon, she was blasted back. Ling Han, help Nyo, the little girl said. All right. Ling Han replied with a smile and charged out, the Empress by his side. Bewitching Maiden Ro, however, did not join the battle. She could deal with a wild beast that did not have much intelligence, but against a human opponent, her weakness would be immediately exposed. Whichever one she was targeted by would be able to easily kill her, or even capture her. Thus, her best choice was to flee as far away as she could, and not join in on this excitement. A great battle began, and soon reached the boiling point. They had all released their respective divided souls. Yang Soul would only have a single divided soul, while Heaven Soul had as many as 4. The 6 people on the opposing side could manifest 30 figures altogether, and with them ganging up on Ling Han and his group that had 3 people with 6 bodies, the advantage in numbers was extremely obvious. The Empress gave a clear cry, and the power of her bloodline activated. Instantly, there were additional 18 doppelgangers, which provided considerable compensation for their shortage of numbers. However, it did not affect any kind of qualitative change in terms of actual strength. Fight, fight, fight. Ling Han did not use the great clash of source powers, but he did cast the other celestial techniques one after another. His real enjoyment lay in fighting human opponents. After all, wild beasts were too dumb. He used the regulations of time, and slowed down the attacks of their enemies respectively. Then, he used the regulations of space. Not only did his figure move gracefully, he would also occasionally banish the attacks of his opponents, repeatedly helping the Empress and Hunyo out of danger. Kill the man first. The 6 people on the opposing side could tell that if they did not kill Ling Han first, there would be absolutely no possibility that they could defeat Ling Han and his party. Ling Han was unafraid. If they all came to attack him, then what difference would these 6 people have compared with the wild beasts that the 4 had previously encountered? Like this, Hunyo and the Empress would be able to unleash their full battle prowess. You're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.